nice to have.
It's 7 o'clock. Welcome you all to the Milton City Hall. And I'm going to open the meeting of the Milton Plan Commission for Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019 to order. And the first item is the roll call.
Farrar,
Here?
Hubbard,
Here.
Murray,
Here.
Paulson,
Here.
Bertahurt,
Here.
Ramsey,
Here.
Savish.
Here.
Everyone is present.
All right. So the first item is the approval of the minutes.
So
Any-
moved.
Second.
Any changes? Everything is okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. We are on to the item number 2. It is the specific implementation plan, SIP modification, fence design review, the Foundry 1690 Aspen Commons. Mark, this is your area?
It is. This is an application to create another fenced-in area at this apartment building. They currently have some 4-foot-high fence, a decorative black aluminum fence. I think it's around their detention area, but they want to extend it over to this area as shown in purple. What I sent you an email earlier today letting you know that our engineer had flagged this as an easement running through the site. You can see it here on this drawing going top to bottom. And so our revised staff recommendation is approval contingent on execution of an easement encroachment agreement and city engineer approval of the design of the post supports.
So moved.
Second.
So,
You want to see what the
Right.
fence, that's the
Actually,
fence right
can you
there.
scroll up to one more picture up, Mark? One more. What is this currently used for, other than just green space with utilities sticking out of the ground? I mean, is it used?
I suspect that dog walkers use it, but I don't know how else it's used.
So, I mean, I'm not against it, but why would they want to enclose this?
yeah,
Do we know why?
I can look
is
if
anybody
there-
here? Yeah, please go ahead and state your name and your address, and let's hear about it.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Stevenson with Elsie Management. What we're looking to do is just make it more accommodation for more of the pet owners in our building,
Okay.
making it a little bit easier
Okay.
for our tenants.
So more for the pet owners, so.
Correct,
okay.
for all of our tenants, yes.
And for the pets.
Okay,
Yeah,
come together, right?
you bet.
That makes sense.
Any
'Cause it's-
other more questions for Andrew, right?
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Michael, you got some? Jennifer? Leaf?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, I guess that sounds like a good idea, so.
Sounds good, we appreciate it, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All those in, well, any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes, and this is with the motion was to make sure that the engineering comments and all of that stuff, Mark?
Contingent on execution of an easement in.
Yeah, it's in your, it's
Okay.
at your
Encroachment
place.
easement.
Okay,
It's in your, I have a packet at your place there.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's
And approval
continue
by
to
the
that.
city engineer of the post
Okay.
designs.
So that's the motion.
Motion, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's written right on the
Yes,
notes.
yes, all right. Okay, we are on to item number 3, which is the specific implementation plan modification for sign design review for stage coach trail apartments 6620 Century Avenue. Who is gonna take it?
That's
Mark?
me. So it's this 20 square foot monument sign rising 4.2 feet above the ground, 4 feet 2 inches above the ground. This is what it looks like. Here is the site plan. The site plan is a bit carelessly drawn. It's actually, the location's actually closer to the building, outside of the easement that we set aside for the future path. There was supposed to be, and I thought we had put photos in here, but I don't see them in the packet for some reason. So if you want, I can try and pull up a photo from the file.
I just want to make sure I heard you correct. the sign is outside the easement for the
Yes,
trail?
it is
Okay.
outside the easement, and I double-checked it, and the base actually has already been installed, but it is outside the easement area.
That's very important, so.
Yeah, so the sign looks
Yeah,
like this.
because, I mean, the SIP modification in front of us shows the sign location in the easement, right?
Right,
So,
and the photos apparently didn't make it into the packet, but I can, if you want, I can try and find it,
Oh,
if that's a
I think we
concern.
got-
I think he's coming to clarify for us.
Hi, Danny Fobb with JT Klein. So we did take the easement into it before pouring that sign base and made sure we measured it out so we're not impeding that future bike path. And one quick modification, the wrong rendering actually made it in. I printed out, the sign's almost identical, but there's a stagecoach wheel in the O instead of an actual O. So I don't know if that's gonna kill us there. The
You
other-
never can tell.
So those are the new renderings there.
Yeah.
And we actually have a
There we
lighter
go.
brick. So we were playing around a little bit with the color instead of that brushed aluminum. We used it at our Oak Ridge building, and it's not showing up as well as we wanted it to. So we might go to a little bit darker, but that would be the only modification. So apologies if the wrong rendering made it in there.
So you're saying the brick would be a little darker than the building's brick?
It would be the same color brick we're taking it. So it's that lighter one. So the one in the rendering is a little bit darker, but it'd be
Yep.
lighter, exact same color as the one on the building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll move approval subject to confirming that the actual location is outside the,
If you look at the photo, I'm very confident that it
we're,
is.
we're subject to,
Yeah.
actually recording it correctly on the SIP modification plan.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is pretty important, so. Any more questions or any more comments? So Mark, at one time you had thought that while they were going to construct this, I know this is not exactly in the agenda, but they were going to construct that 10-foot wide path there,
Oh.
and what I saw today was about 4 foot wide.
Oh, yeah, it's not constructed. We decided a while ago that it would just be part of the North Mendota Trail, the Northeast Connector project.
So that will be done later.
That'll be done later when the rest of the path is built.
So right now it's just a,
Yeah, they set it aside at no cost to the city. They set the land aside, and so when we construct it, the rest of the path, then this part will be constructed. It looks like he is.
No, I was just gonna ask, on the
Oh.
SIP landscape plan that you just showed us, is the monument correctly identified in its location?
Yes, it is. It's more, yeah, so it's much
Okay.
closer to the building.
So whoever drew it in by hand drew it wrong, but on the CAD, you got it in the right spot.
Yeah, exactly. On the CAD, where it actually matters is in the right spot.
Is the sign illuminated at night?
Yes, there is gonna be an upward light, similar to our Meadow Ridge and Oak Ridge projects, where it'll be, from the base pointing up, not overly bright, but bright enough to see it at night.
That's actually good to know. I didn't think it was illuminated. We should talk about the
And
uplighting.
haven't we gone to down lighting?
That's right.
Instead
That's
of
right.
uplighting,
So
we
we need to talk about that. So our ordinance no longer allows uplighting in most cases. I just assumed that this was a non-lit sign because it didn't show any electrical connections. So you said you are doing that at your?
We ran power to it. We haven't actually selected the light on it, so.
But you're
we-
doing it at your Meadow Ridge project?
Yes, or at Oak Ridge, yes.
so that's, those are also down lighting or that's up lighting?
Yeah, we'd be open to whatever the city allows us to put for lighting. We'd like to put lighting so you can see it at night, but I was not aware that it had to be
Okay,
downward
so
facing
that
setup.
we want to make a part of the motion to make sure that this is down lighting?
agreed, so we'll
Okay.
amend the motion to require downlighting as part of the approval.
Yes. So any further questions for the gentleman?
Where the light source will be coming from is, of course, the question. So
So you
we'll
will-
work with him.
Okay, you will work out the details. Okay. Good question, Jennifer. Any more questions? Okay, all those in favor of the motion of this SIP modification for the Stagecoach Trail Apartments, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. Item number 4, determination of need for sidewalks, Clark Street north of Lee Street. Who's gonna take it? Abby, Mark?
It's me. And just to let everyone know, the system we're using, if in case you're wondering if you ever have questions for staff, we are putting our initials after the background, so that is the person who is the lead on the staff
All
report.
right,
So
all
just-
right, so.
We
if
used to
it
do
is-
that in the agenda item, but we're
So
doing
that's
it.
your MO
If
now?
it's
That's my-
MO, is that Mark?
That's my MO as Kurt.
Modus operandi.
Always Mark Opitz.
I'll take MO over AA.
AA's
All right,
All right, so this is before you tonight because the determination of which streets, whenever we decide to require sidewalks along a street outside of a normal development process when the street is built, the Plan Commission provides that direction. And so the arrows point to the street segment in question. This is, of course, the Clark Street Community School, and then the future Conservancy Bend site, and Paul's and Cool Hand Customs. So the issue before you tonight is that we have very limited right-of-way, or I shouldn't say very limited, but somewhat limited right-of-way. This is an example of the 50-foot right-of-way that's adjoining on Lee Street, and so we don't have room for our normal terrace width that we'd like to have, 7 or 8 feet. And so what we're doing is what I laid out for you in the staff report is some scenarios, some options for you to consider in terms of how you would like to, if you first of all would like to require sidewalk, which Conservancy Bend is providing that, and since that's going to be a housing project, we endorse that and recommend that we have sidewalk along the entire segment. So one option is to limit sidewalk width to 4 feet and then leave room for a 2-foot wide terrace. Another option would be to purchase additional right-of-way, which we don't recommend. That would encumber the adjoining properties on the west side. Another option is to narrow the street, especially the west side of the street. You could bring that in, which would remove parking on one side. The street's going to be reconstructed in the next couple of years. I think it's 2021 is when Public Works is planning to do that. So that would be another way to accomplish the objective. So that is for your discussion.
Can you scroll up to the other picture?
The other picture. This one, okay. Yep.
We'd talked a couple months ago about whether the Public Works Committee would have any interest in modifying that kind of ugly cul-de-sac. And I know that the difficulty is that's a good access point to the Conservancy, but it's also where high schoolers are going to park, and that's a problem too.
It's probably posted for
It's posted for
2 hour, or I don't know what it
no
is.
parking or 2-hour parking, or so. It'd just be good for Public Works and Public Lands to consider kind of making that because it's an underutilized access into the Conservancy. Not a lot of people know about it, but just to kind of spruce it up as long as we're working in that area. The other question is, what's the standard sidewalk width in Middleton? It's
But
5 feet?
Our standard now is 5 feet.
Has it been 4 feet in the past?
yep.
20 years ago or more.
Because you always hear comments from people from outside the city about our narrow sidewalks. What is ADA requirement?
I don't know if there's a required minimum width. Our standard is 5 feet. It has been for a couple of decades.
That's true for medicine as well. I think they always.
Some
have
communities are even doing 6s, I understand it. And I think in our
Yeah.
downtown, we probably have done 6 in some places. But
Mark,
5
what
is,
would you expect the sidewalk to be for the new development?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
What's your expectation for what the sidewalk will be in the adjoining property, the new development?
The width, you mean?
Yes.
I didn't actually look to see what their plans said, but again, depending on the design option you select, if you would rather see the street narrowed, and the reason I'm showing Lee Street is because this is what the concept would look like with a 2-foot terrace, or you can bring the curb in on Clark Street and achieve a 5-foot sidewalk with the wider terrace, maybe even have it would be wide enough for some street trees. I personally like this idea. I don't have a strong preference either way, but I think obviously there's a greater cost to reconstruct the street by pouring new curbs and resetting the inlets. So that's not the cheap option.
So John,
It-
do you guys have any, if you want to comment, since you're part of it, if you have any preference or any thoughts on it?
Well, while he's coming, can I ask a procedural question? Plan commission just determines whether sidewalks are needed, right? The width
Yeah.
and the layout presumably, is that something we comment on, or is that
Well,
Public
I think
Works?
if you wanted, since it gets into streetscape and, I mean, I agree it's a public works matter.
I mean,
Ellie.
I do not want narrow sidewalks. I mean, if you're gonna build a sidewalk, build it right.
Another option would be to just have the sidewalk go right up to the curb too, but then at driveways, this is getting a little bit technical for this committee, like you
Yeah.
said, but it's, anyway, what did you have for Conservancy Bend?
John Hepner, Development Manager, T-Wall Enterprises. So we would prefer a 5-foot sidewalk, and would
Yeah.
prefer to not have to, as Mark stated, reconstruct the entire street and curb, as we would prefer not to pay for a part of that. I think likewise, it would allow us some opportunity for street trees or grass or additional landscaping, versus just a concrete terrace.
Any questions for John while he's there?
You mean so the 5 feet is on your side, but on the other side, near the Clark Street Community School, there's already a sidewalk, and
That's-
that is, no, there is
No, there's
not.
not.
There's
No.
no sidewalk. It ends right at the
Yeah, but the.
school. So there would,
Go ahead, sorry.
we would put that in all the length of the school?
We could, yeah, and this is city-owned property. The school is city-owned property, so if we went outside what's considered the right-of-way, we could do that. Obviously, it encroaches upon the school
Yeah.
further, but
It'd be really nice to bury those power lines, but that's,
That's another question.
we're dealing with more pedestrian issues, Kurt.
And our Public Works Department indicated that if the Plan Commission did give direction for the properties that are city-owned but utilized by the school district, they would include that in their sidewalk improvement plan for next year.
That's probably a good idea.
well, I'll tell you my preference, which is probably what a lot of you have, is 5 feet sidewalks on both sides, because it's an area near a school and hundreds of housing units and entering the Conservancy, let's do it right. If we have to narrow a street, I'd much rather narrow a street than narrow a sidewalk.
And that's a standard in any case now, so.
So what kind of motion do we need here, Mark?
Well, I think stating your preference, first of all, you want sidewalks, which isn't, which I anticipated. You prefer to have the sidewalks be 5 feet, and how that's achieved, maybe
both
that's
sides.
where, on both sides, and how that's achieved, maybe the mechanics of it you leave up to Public Works. But I think the concept, the other benefit of what's gonna happen here is with this property owner, they've expressed support for, narrowing the width of their driveway. I mean, they basically don't have it's
They're
a
gonna
driveway. but-
Eliminate a curb cut, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so narrowing the street, and I understand what John is saying about not wanting to have too big of an expense here, but narrowing the street would really provide this property owner more room, give Conservancy Bend a bit more room. Obviously, it comes at the cost of parking on one side of the street, but the parking is regulated during the day as it is. As you have noted, it's not,
So we could leave that.
Does anybody use, I mean, the people who live in the Conservancy Bend now will use the street, so it'll get a lot more use.
right. But they also have off-street parking, of course.
Right. But I don't mind losing, well,
Is Clark Street on the schedule for
2021.
street work?
Yeah, 2021 for reconstruction, so this is a very timely discussion, yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I still think you could get parking on both sides and just a narrower travel lane.
You could, we generally don't do it that way in Middleton, but doesn't mean we can't. Matt, you see that all over
All the high
Madison.
school drivers?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's also a
Oh,
cul-de-sac,
nice.
so it's maybe not as big of a deal here.
Yeah, it's,
I think the one property which is most affected is the Cool Hands. So that is the biggest question there. So I think, I guess,
can
you know,
you
you,
can you remind us, when we saw their site plan, didn't it show a sidewalk coming in? Or that would be a sidewalk over the
No.
driveway apron?
no, they didn't
No.
have it. They didn't even, Is anybody here from Cool Hands?
They wouldn't be.
Okay, yeah, they
Would
didn't
it-
even know about it. so-
Would it count as just a sidewalk on their driveway apron?
Count as a sidewalk on the.
Because if you look right now, it's all asphalt.
Hard surface, so.
Yeah, what would happen is Public Works will then, when they redo the street and then when this gets redone, there'll be a driveway, a concrete apron. That's what they do.
Just a concrete apron.
Apron with the sidewalk alongside it. You know, without getting into street design, I mean, the pole, I think this pole is actually gone, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, I'm 98% sure it's gone. This is a 12-year-old image. That went away as part of the Parmenter Street project. However, the poles remain on this side of the street.
I mean, this is a once in a generation time to get it right. Because once you put it in, it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna take on more of a residential feel anyway, so, yeah, I think sidewalks on both sides. 5
Sidewalks on
feet
both sides,
wide.
5 feet wide. That's my motion.
Okay,
Would you consider at the end of the cul-de-sac, as you talked about earlier, the Public Works partnering with Public Lands to see if they can't do something a little bit more with an
Yeah.
entry.
An entry point.
Concept to the creek corridor,
for the conservation.
especially because it's now, you know, with the development to the
I mean,
west.
maybe we don't need a cul-de-sac that big. Maybe you can put some
Yeah, or maybe there's just
some
some
parking and some signage.
Just, yeah, maybe some other kind of design there.
Certainly don't need a cul-de-sac that big,
No,
way too big.
That's for turnaround.
So that can be made smaller when we narrow the street.
Well, I know that wasn't your question, Mark, but I was just looking at that, as long as we're reconstructing the entire
Mhm.
street, it seemed like
Yeah.
do it right.
it'd be,
Fix it
something where Public Works and Public Lands would work together to come up with a concept that would make that entryway to the conservancy more inviting and that type of thing.
More useful.
You wonder when they put it there, what was just, how did it come about? So the history of it. Okay, any more questions? Michael? Michael is happy. About Jennifer?
Is part of the motion to narrow the street or not right now?
I think that would be for the Public Works.
Yeah, the
right?
motion is just sidewalk on both sides, 5 feet, and we'll wait to see the geometric design from Public Works. Unless you want to kind of include a sense of the.
I like the idea of narrowing it because it would sort of slow down the traffic and
Mhm.
as it will sort of act like less of a public street and more of a social space.
Yeah.
Because it's,
Well, let me change the motion then to, that we determine the need for 5-foot sidewalks along both sides of Clark Street and recommend to Public Works, possible narrowing of the street and improving the cul-de-sac interface with the Conservancy.
Need a second.
second,
So, Mark, do you know what's the width of the road, this one here?
The right-of-way is 50 feet. It looks to me like the road is 36 feet, based on the fact that these two cars are there. I would guess that that's a 36-foot wide street. I can
Oh.
measure it if you
And
want.
look,
but-
you can get 2 cars and 2 travel lanes at a
Right.
25-mile-an-hour design.
Yeah, I mean, that's
or
why,
15-mile-an-hour design speed.
that's why I thought narrowing the road makes a lot of sense. And then, just to be clear, what you're proposing is obviously the sidewalk would be along the edge of the right-of-way, you know, the usual few inches from the right-of-way. But then you'd devote that extra space to the terrace, is what I'm surmising.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then the sidewalk on this side, I'll work with Public Works to just, we can just decide where that's gonna be, but that doesn't necessarily have to stay in the right-of-way.
Okay, so now, Wayne, any more input on the
Nope.
motion?
Ready to vote.
Anyone else? So the motion is to have sidewalks, and the sidewalk will be 5 foot wide, and then work with the Public Works for the cul-de-sac and narrow the road accordingly. All those in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. We are on to item number 5. This is the concept review for de-annexing, oh God bless you. De-annexing property from the community of Bishop Bay for proposed temporary well holding tank on Uncle Road. This is for the Cross Lutheran Church of Middleton. And this is, this doesn't have any, oh, Abby.
Yes. So I kind of spelled out, the information in the staff report here. This did go to the Middleton Westport Joint Zoning Committee for consideration, and there was no action taken at that meeting. Our staff's feeling is that we're concerned, about how this might set a precedent for future development, in the community of Bishops Bay. Whether it actually would set a precedent or not, I'm sure if the city were to approve of de-annexing a portion of this planned community to allow for them to build without using the city's utilities, then we would hear from other applicants that are requesting the same sort of consideration. In fact, I actually got a voicemail from Terrence yesterday saying that he thinks that we already set a precedent with Inspire Daycare property, and that now we have to allow this because a precedent has already been set. The Inspire project is different. It's not part of the planned community of Bishops Bay. It's in the town of Westport. So to me, the two aren't related except for that they're in proximity to each other. They're in different jurisdictions. I fully sympathize with Pastor Brandt. We've had really good meetings with them, and I understand their need, and I think he's here to present his request.
All right,
Yes, as Abby mentioned, we've met several times. We also met prior with Tom Wilson from Westport, and then also with Eileen, I bet you probably 4 times, trying to look at various ways of trying to accommodate the zoning and the restrictions of Middleton pertaining to a holding tank, septic, and a well. The issue is, the opportunity to try to build. Currently, Cross Lutheran Church is worshiping in the clubhouse, as many of you knew from the joint zoning meeting. And the room there is approximately the size of this area if you squared it off. And it accommodates about 50, 60 people. And we've already gone to 2 services. There's over 100 members already. And we are, and I use the analogy of a family of 4 living in a studio apartment. And so our request is to see if you would consider permitting us to build just the first portion of a bigger project that we hope to build later on after the pump station is built and water is provided. We're looking only at a 3-acre parcel on Unkin Road. And that area is next to Westport, and across the street also is Westport. And in the conversations with Eileen prior to Abby, prior to her retirement, we kind of met to try to come up with options, some way that this could possibly be done. And so we tried looking at all the alternatives, and in talking with Tom from Westport, Tom Wilson, the discussion came up about the possibility of a de-annex and then a later re-annex. As soon as the pump station was in, we would hook up, we would do whatever was needed. We'd put in the laterals, we'd be all set. We would not build anymore. We would do nothing other than what we're proposing in this first phase until pump station was completed, and go from there. That is basically our request.
so now you said that you're very close to the Westport. Could it be just built in Westport? I don't know what they're, no?
Not really. It's in the Bishop's Bay development.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have, I don't know if you have the proposal, we gave a 6-page proposal for the zoning. It's in that, I think, little corner right next to those homes. It would be, I don't know what direction that actually is.
North is up. North is up.
North is up, okay, it's, yeah, just to the, and east, is that east, Mark?
East is to the right.
East is, okay, so it'd be the northwest corner of that plot.
Oh,
It'd be 3 acres, that whole parcel going all the way down is 20 acres. And that is land designated for school
Or civic.
in the future. And what our plan is eventually to have a church and school there that would complement the development and then also the Inspire daycare. We're not trying to duplicate anything. We're only trying to get started there with a Christian education option and a church. And the impact at this phase would be minimal. It's Sunday morning, a couple meetings during the course of the week, and that's where I would even propose a holding tank, because a holding tank is more minimal usage. It has no environmental impact. But if you want a septic, we can do septic. And the idea was it would enable us to move forward. And that's where we tried to go ahead with the first proposal with regard to doing it in Middleton, but because that goes contrary to existing, I think, policies, is that correct? Hence the annex, de-annex conversation. And that's where, we talked with Westport. They have done this before. They would be amenable, but they're totally dependent upon Middleton. And that's why we're here today.
Okay, let the discussion begin.
I'm going to ask some technical questions. I think first of all, we should not refer to it as de-annexing.
Okay?
The technical term is detachment.
Detach, okay?
Because no, but I mean, and there's no such thing as re-annexing. There's only annexation and detachment.
Okay.
That's just state law. But that's not your issue. So this is, Mark, can you show us where the Inspire preschool is on the overhead map?
Map or on a photo?
Or on a photo? Yeah, photo.
Let's do north up,
Let's
right?
do north up, please. It's right over there. Right.
They're looking
Right.
at here.
So this might be a question for Tyler instead, but there's only PDD or a GIP on this parcel, correct? They have not gone through an SIP on this parcel? Okay, we'll ask Tyler the question.
Taylor Brengel, Community
Taylor.
Bishops Bay. Yes, there's a master development plan, which
Right.
is essentially the GIP. And then we're supposed to do the SIP as,
Right.
adaptable per
So
the MDP.
if I recall, the phase directly west of this is the reserve? Or what did we call
west-
it?
Yes, yeah.
And those
Reserve-
three houses
Reserve
that are
Hill.
there, you haven't started building.
Those
it.
three
Those
houses
the-
are not part of the development.
Those are
They
not.
never wanted to sell.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay.
That's why they're, yeah.
That's right, it's not part of the. What I'm trying to think about is there a way that when an SIP is recorded for this particular parcel, that the SIP could include some really double super strong conditionality on the infrastructure utilities? Because I suspect that detachment, which would have to be approved by council, right?
Yep.
I don't think that's gonna fly.
So you're saying is rather than detachment, just limit the SIP. Because
Is there a way to do that, to make it really?
my thought was to have a detachment agreement that specifies, 'cause we've done annexation agreements in the past, this development in particular. So just doing a detachment agreement that specifies by X date or X event happening, which would be extension of the utilities, or if you want to do a date, as a date, outside date certain, the property will be annexed and connected. And as Pastor Charlie indicated, as part of their phase 1 construction, they'll be putting the stubs for the future utilities. The issue is just that, the services are not at this site yet.
So the conditionality would not be written into the SIP. It would really be like a developer's agreement.
Yep.
And a contract, not a regulatory.
And without the city attorney here, I could say, I would think that easiest way to deal with this would be a developer's agreement. That's typically how we've done it with the city attorney, city attorneys. But, to step back for a second, from the community of Bishop's Bay's side, it's a chicken or the egg problem. We're not ready for, $20 million worth of infrastructure yet, when we're still working on phase 5, selling that out. So, we're gonna lose yet another promising prospect that fits with the community, that helps build a stronger community, especially with the church. And we're gonna lose them to the north, like we've lost the grocery store and the bank, and, I'm sure Terrence has given you guys the list of, what's at stake here. And again, this is Cross Lutheran that's coming to you guys to ask for this, and I'm merely here to I feel bad because they're stuck in the middle of this, I don't want to call it disagreement, whatever we're working through between Bishop's Bay, Terrence, and the city of Middleton.
Right.
And it's tough because we've got this church that has 100 members. They're at their breaking point, and, as far as what I've heard, it's this site or they've got to find somewhere else north, because, they can't keep up with the current clubhouse, what he didn't,
I didn't get to that part
you didn't
yet.
share to that
Right.
part, but,
Yeah.
they're taking down the chairs every Sunday, they're resetting up. I mean, there's a lot of, work here. Pastor Joel was at the joint zoning, so Pastor Joel is the leader of Cross Lutheran. He was at the joint zoning meeting explaining about how he has to go out there and shovel in the mornings before the snow crews are getting, it's just all these complications. Whereas, as I see it, and, again, it's up to you guys, but we're letting these utility technicalities get in the way of good planning. The church is a consistent use with what's planned here. It was supposed to be for church, school, public use, civic use. We're sticking with that. There's already Inspire, so there's that, there's already that pull. And Inspire ends at, let's say, 5 years, and you guys would start after that. So there'd be like a nice synergy between the two of them. And again, the health, welfare, and public safety of the users are protected. They will have a holding tank and a well for the needs for this site, and it's low volume. So again, I'm talking too much, but.
So most of these members are from the community of Bishop Bay?
They are from Bishop's Bay, there's a couple, and then from Middleton and from Wanakee. They're from all over that. And I think part of the plan for the future would be with having the church and the school, especially early education programs like a latchkey program, after-school programs, those kind of things. They will draw members from that community that live there. That's the plan. And as Taylor said, we've been waiting and waiting, and we're running out of options.
Yes.
Well,
Yes,
I think
correct.
what the joint zoning minutes would reflect what Jennifer said there is what we all,
Yeah.
in terms of the land use, the programming on the site, yes, that's what it was
It
planned
fits,
for,
yeah.
neighborhood civic,
Yep,
and
yep.
it's a great idea. It's the de-annexation or the detachment and the utilities. So
And we are open to any way that it could happen.
trying to figure that out. But
Yeah,
as I explained on the phone, you're
Yeah.
in the unfortunate position where
we're caught in the middle.
you're caught in the middle, is one way
Yep.
to say it.
So with respect to utilities, we addressed this back at the end of 2018, where there was the plan to have the utilities in place by 2019. That was extended 2 years. Taylor, are those utilities going to be constructed by the end of 2021 as
How we left
To
it in
the
the last, sorry to interrupt. How we left it in the last amendment to the regional utility developers agreement between the city of Middleton, town of Westport, and the community of Bishop's Bay, was if the developer wants another extension past the current deadline, then we have to create a secondary line to the back nine. At this point, I can't speak for the development and where things are going. I think that's what we're critically looking at. But, yeah, I don't think, can I just say, I guess I'm on the record, but as I see it, we're not ready to build $20 million worth of infrastructure because we still have houses in phase 5 that we've got to sell. Because we need, and I've explained this in the past, but essentially you need the users to justify the uses. So we can't have commercial users committing to the town squares, what we found, and us committing to the debt of $20 million. And the debt service alone on that's $500,000 to the developer a year. I mean, we're not hitting those kinds of sales right now. We're not there yet. So at this point, we're critically looking at it with our engineers, and I think, Terrence has reached out to Public Works to try to set up a meeting to look at what the alternatives are. But at this point, we'll get as I see it, we might get a secondary line across Highway Q to serve the back nine, so that the back nine's not on a dead end. Although that's up for debate too, because it's not really a dead end. But I don't need to get into that because we can talk through that with engineers. But as I see it, I don't understand how we could sign up for that kind of debt when we're not ready for it. So
And
no,
I
I don't.
understand. I think
Yeah.
the challenge we have though right now is there is an agreement between the city and the developer to have that line in place by 2021. If that were to happen, problem solved. I hear that that's at risk, but until we have a resolution of what the plan going forward is, I don't see that it would be responsible for the city to detach a property here, establishing a precedent that we already heard. Another situation may be used as a precedent. I am totally sympathetic to the needs of the church.
Yes.
As a resident of Back Nine, I am glad that the church is growing, want to see it succeed and flourish. And I feel really bad for the churches. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. We're dealing though with an agreement that's in place, and I don't see how we act in opposition to that existing agreement.
And as, just to speak to the precedents, I think what Terrence was trying to draw the connection to with Abby, and I wasn't a part of that conversation, I didn't hear the voice message, but as I understand it from talking with Terrence is, he's, in his mind is, Middleton already approved Inspire via the joint zoning actions that were taken to approve it. And by so approving, there's already been a precedent, so rather than looking at the precedents and the concern of breaking the line, is let's look at this on a case-by-case basis. I'm not talking about 100 houses here. I'm talking about 2 people in an office Monday through Friday and 100 people for an hour at church service. This isn't, and that's where, and I think obviously that's where the developer always comes in and says, oh, look at it at a case-by-case basis, and you guys are like, well, we got to have some kind of precedence because it's easy, otherwise it makes it, the lines are too blurry. But I mean, essentially, this is an MDP that we've established that grants us, page 20 of the MDP grants us the flexibility to adapt to the market circumstances. And I brought that, I can hand that page out, but for what it's worth, we anticipated the need as a developer to adapt to the economy. That we can't say, hey, we're gonna do A, B, C, D, and E, and F in order. We might need to, here's a master plan, the master development plan, and we'll take it as the economy just because that's one thing that as developers we can't foresee. I had no idea that this was, gonna unfold the way it did. I mean, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars planning that town center, and then we had to pump the brakes because our board said, no, you guys we can't feasibly do that to our investors, all local investors. We can't proceed with that kind of debt unless we have the sales to back it up. And you can't have the sales without the users, is what, all these big boxes are telling it, the grocery store,
So Taylor, about Inspire, I guess that wasn't part of the community of Bishop Bay, number one, and number two, that is actually in Westport, right?
Yeah, I'm not making that argument.
Okay, all right, thank you. Good.
Merely trying to
All
explain
right,
what
we on
maybe
the same
somebody was
side,
thinking
so,
in that
okay.
argument. I see the flaws.
Taylor's a
Of
good
that
lawyer, and he
argument.
does better when his client is not there to speak for himself. Can we all agree?
Thank you.
I mean, the difficulty of this is, like what Wayne was saying, we like the land use. Wayne and I go to church. We like the church is growing, but making it seem like it's just an equivalence of between a rock and a hard place. Well, the problem is if the city denies this, we're going to look like the bad guys. But I think there's probably a perception amongst our city council people that the responsibility is not shared equally as to why the infrastructure is not there yet. And so the difficulty is I'll be careful how I say this. We have no doubt whatsoever that the church will honor its word. We have, with the master developer, we have some timetables have always been shifting, so we're a little uncertain about when things will actually happen. Is that ambiguous enough for people?
Yes.
All right, it's clear.
With the detachment
I'm
agreement.
gonna get a text from Terrence any minute now saying,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
I mean, as I understand it, we're talking about 3 acres, not the full 20. 3 acres is currently owned by Wisconsin Foundation, which is a charitable foundation. So it's not owned by the community of Bishop Bay. The Wisconsin Foundation would transfer that property to Cross Lutheran, pay the release fee, and that's something we haven't even brought up, is that this parcel is part of the Master Utility District Agreement. That Master Utility District Agreement dictates that in order to transfer the property or subdivide the property, a release fee has to be paid. So for example, Phase 5, we paid $3.5 million as a release payment for improvements that aren't there yet. And $450,000 of that went to the city of Middleton. Bill Burns had it and then paid off the debt that was on the books with that. So likewise, again, this 3 acres would pay its pro rata share, roughly, I think it's about $26,000 an acre. And then you guys would have an agreement with Cross Lutheran, since there might be, or maybe it's a tri-party agreement. But is that something that, could we get some kind of is it possible, your hesitations, common council might say no.
Right.
Is it possible to get just like a neutral position from Plan Commission so that then we can take the next challenge of convincing common council?
There was a master development plan.
Yep.
That led to the lands all being annexed into the city, right? There's a master utility plan.
Not
So
to
like
correct you,
the-
but the master utility, or the master development plan, half the land is in Westport, so
Right.
394 lots.
But this parcel that
This
we're talking
parcel
about
isn't, yes.
was annexed as a
Correct.
result of that
I'm sure, yes.
development plan.
Yeah,
So you can understand from the city's perspective,
hesitation.
well, we had a plan, we had a utility district, we had an agreement.
And we also thought
Nothing's
this
changed on
development
our
was
end.
gonna happen in 10 years back in 2007, we started planning it, and we're now in 2019. So imagine our dismay that it's like, as I've told Wayne on a couple occasions, we want this development to happen. We
Oh,
want
yeah.
it, I mean, not to say it in a bad way, I wanna be
You wanna be
done
done.
with this development. Nothing more would make Terrence and I happier than this development being successful, because it's good for Middleton. And it's much needed, because there's a housing shortage in Madison. But the issue is infrastructure costs are going up, house construction costs are going up, to the point where there's a limited buyer pool right now that can afford to develop in this development. So we're looking, again, I think Terrence sent out some communication recently saying, we're gonna look at trying to find more affordable solutions to housing, but anyways.
Terrence sends out a lot of communication.
So I hear.
No, just on a basic planning level, besides all of the issues we're talking about, one concept that I don't like about this proposal is that it sort of develops in hops, skips and jumps. There's a certain plan that has been developed for the entire area, and it requires other components of that plan to be completed before other portions happen. That's a little bit of a concern of mine, that we'll have a land use further away from all of the other components of this development, and we don't know for how many years that will happen. And there'll be different components of how we want to connect to that parcel later that we can't decide right now, because it will be sort of this odd component in the whole plan until it's completed. So you won't be able to bike to the church unless you want to bike on Onken Road. You can't walk there unless you go across the field. I mean, things like that are part of the city of Middleton's planning and as well. And I'm concerned about that this is sort of isolated and not, integrated into what the vision is initially meant to be, which is incremental growth outside of the downtown and sort of outward in this case.
More planned development, so.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but the reason we've identified this site with the church is because of the Onken Road access. And actually, I mean, to be honest, in seeing Inspire and what they got approved, it kind of sparked the light bulb of, because essentially these guys were going to wait for the Watermark neighborhood, which I don't have the master development plan, but it's somewhere off of Highway Q is the Watermark neighborhood, and that's where the church was going to go. But in order to put them in that location, which is interior to the farm parcel right now, we'd have to develop all the utilities. So we weren't ready for that. So that's why we came up with, hey, we've got the 20 acres in the Wisconsin Foundation that's identified. This is consistent zoning. As I see it, and I don't mean to minimize utilities, but the only issue is this utility issue. As far as zoning, it is consistent with our master development plan. As far as how we're supposed to phase things in our master development plan, the MDP, our master development plan, which is 179 pages, calls out specifically that we need flexibility to adapt with our SIPs, and that our SIPs will refine as development occurs. Because that's been our experience as developers is learning how to adapt to the realities of, you've got this great vision, you've got this great plan, but then putting it into reality, things shift. And so learning how to adapt to that without, and again, I just feel bad that these guys are stuck in the middle of the utility debate that Bishop's Bay and Middleton's having right now.
See, and our only thought was that going on this Onken Road site, it might help the development. I mean, churches are good for community. It might attract more people. It might attract more building. It might speed up the process. I don't know. I stand here, though, requesting it because it's selfish for us. I mean, it's our existence. If we can't go ahead, we'll have to go elsewhere. I mean, and we want to be in the Bishop's Bay development because we see all the potential. That's why we wanted to be there. That's why we've been waiting in the clubhouse for so long. And that's why my request is, if there is any possible way you guys can think of, I think that was the nature of the discussion with Tom Wilson, with Westport, to say, how about this as an option?
How about using the town hall?
Where's that, Westport's Town Hall, or?
Yeah, for a few years. I can't speak for them, but.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't think that room is a lot bigger than what we have.
again, in terms of the land use
Yeah.
and the attractiveness of the church, yep, we're with it.
I know you are.
I think the only way is if we can find a way to do it still in the city. And that's the utility issue.
And that comes back to
and I'm not sure it's completely accurate to characterize it as an ongoing debate between the city and Bishop's Bay.
Right.
There's no debate because there's already an agreement and a plan, so.
Well, and these people that came, that are sitting here, are all part of the group that set up and take down every single Sunday morning. You know, they're there an hour and a half early to move all the chairs out, all the tables out, chairs up, church, take it all down again. And then they have people that have vans, they put magnetic signs on so they can shuttle up the hill. That was where we were looking at an option. You know, and you know, that's the nature of our request, to say, is there any way, anything we can do that you guys can think of that's different, I don't know, where we can make this start to happen? That's our request.
Well,
Abby
yes,
or Mark,
Michael,
is there
you
any
got
way we
some-
can do it? Is there any way we can do it in an SIP?
Because I don't like the detachment idea.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as a viable option. So an SIP, some kind of, but
So
I
this,
agree, it's gotta be really, really
Tight.
tight.
And we would be willing to work with that. I mean, I think I shared that with Abby. We would be willing to do whatever would be needed so we could go ahead
so
with this.
how would this land be conveyed? And again, I'm new on the planning commission, so I don't have all the history there, but it's currently owned by the Wisconsin Foundation, is that correct, Taylor?
That's correct.
We would purchase it.
So
But it's-
your purchase is a payment made to who?
To the Wisconsin Foundation.
Okay, so
So that Wisconsin Foundation can make the, we haven't, yeah, it's subsidized, to say.
right, so I mean, how this might normally happen in the private sector is that, all right, I don't see the detachment being approved by council either. That probably doesn't make any sense, but is there any willingness, and I guess this would be the seller, which is the foundation, escrowing funds or a letter of credit to the benefit of the city of Middleton to provide some assurance, some time frame to this, that at some point in the future, that when those utilities are extended, that there will be a mechanism for, again, not that we don't trust that the church will do what they say they're gonna do, but it
But you want something concrete.
well, it's
want a letter of-
it's collateral. It's collateral to the
Absolutely.
representations
Yeah.
and that are being made here.
Yeah, so I can't speak for my client, but,
Yeah.
do want to point out that under the current agreements, we're escrowing in essence, because if this is in Middleton, we have to pay a release price for the sewer and the water. Sean Stowski would know what the actual per acre amount is, and that money sits with Middleton in some account. So would that help, or are you looking for
Well,
something
but
beyond that?
By agreement, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that was the agreement that was made. This is kind of outside of
Outside, so you want
that
some more
agreement.
security?
I throw that out.
I would,
Discussion, consideration. Again, in an effort to thinking outside the box, and, you know, certainly we generally as a planning commission, we're here to support staff, and not just planning staff, but public works and, you know, city attorney, which expressed a number of concerns there in the staff report. So, you know, is there another way to get there? I throw that out for consideration.
That's a good idea, so.
you'd want to have an ironclad conditionality in the SIP that the zoning would revert if it's not approved within a certain time period, and probably a letter of credit, not just from the foundation, but from
Could we do that?
Bishop's Bay. But,
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I'm spending your money, yeah, but
Could we put that, I mean, I'd imagine just putting the whole thing in a developer agreement of some sort. And I don't mean the typical infrastructure development agreement or TIF development agreement, but that's something I could work out with the city attorneys, is some kind of a zoning approval with conditionality that's recorded with the land.
I don't know how legal it is to do conditional zoning. Since,
Okay.
and a recorded SIP is gonna be good for
5 years?
5 years at least.
And I think realistically, Taylor, for the city to consider, we need to understand generally the economics of the transaction, sales price, and, how much money, if you were gonna escrow letter credit, how much would you actually set aside of that sale? Maybe all of it? I don't know.
Plus, there's the issue that you'd have to find a way for the engineer to be satisfied with basically well and septic or holding tank for some number of years.
I mean, the one thing that I brought up at joint zoning too is, you know, this is just approving phase 1 of their development. The church needs phase 2 and phase 3, so we're not approving those phases now. And I think what you said is you're willing to wait until the utilities are extended to the site in order to start phase 2 and 3, so they have an incentive. Yeah, I've got to understand the purchase price as well, so I've got to understand that, because I don't, you know, right now this is so contingency based, you know, we don't know whether there is a deal, so I got to work that out.
We understand.
But yeah, that's something we could help you guys understand, is what our sale price is and what amount we'd be willing to escrow, if any. I can't speak for my client, but I think if that's the path forward, then that's something we'll have to consider.
So is that the best way they work with the staff and then come back?
Absolutely, Mayor.
Okay.
Well, so then in terms of a motion, we could do a couple of things. We could vote against granting concept review for de-annexing, with the understanding that some other agreement will have to be worked out. Or we could forward it to city council with no recommendation, recognizing that.
I would go
that-
with the. I
That's,
would go-
it's probably not gonna do anything, cause it'll probably fail at council.
I probably would
And this
go
is just
with-
concept review on an annexation. So we could just not actually take any formal action, or do we wanna have a vote on the record? One way.
It sounds like the planning commission is not in support of attachment. I don't want to speak for the board, but it's,
Right.
discussion seems to be going that way. So then, you know, asking staff to work with, you know, or consider, you know, is there another mechanism that allows this to proceed for some period of time with some form of collateral, some teeth in this to make sure that, you know, that the utilities are extended and there's a connection at some point.
Does that make sense to you, Kurt? So is that your motion and
Or
yours
do we
is
want a
second?
motion, or just let the record reflect that?
I think we should have a motion.
Okay.
I also think I keep coming back to, we're dealing with a particular manifestation of the bigger issue, which is that there was a timeline and a plan we're hearing is changing. I would really like to see sometime soon some revision then of the plan and timeline for what will become, what is anticipated by the developer. Completely understanding that things change, okay? But we don't know what the timeline and the plans are based on current understanding. I mean, Terrence himself addressed in one of his correspondences the way in which the nature of the residential development has changed based on market. In other words, anticipating more lower priced units, that hasn't been possible. I'd like to know how else the plan for development of the property is anticipated, and really getting this issue of the utilities resolved, to know between the city and developer what really will happen and when, so that it's not a guessing game.
And the timeline is not in the GIP, it's in the utility agreement and the developers agreement?
There's a utility district agreement there's like a lot of agreements. There's City of Middleton and Bishops Bay and Westport and Middleton, and then there's some, but yeah, that's, Larry and I have been, or City Attorney Beckler and I have been working on that for a lot of time. So that's something we can look at, and Sean Stowski is very familiar with those agreements, so something I believe Terrence set something up in September with Abby to kind of, and Sean to do some kind of like comprehensive look at future planning, so that we can address what your suggestion is, which is, you know, let's get some, you know, rather than leaving it open-ended, and I guess the agreements don't leave it really open-ended, but let's get that figured out now. Meanwhile, I think if we can hopefully give these guys, kind of simultaneously pursue both, I'd appreciate that. So I'll start to work with staff and Cross Lutheran on what security could look like to kind of give assurances, and I think that'd probably be something that Sean would want to weigh in on as well. And then we'll come back to you guys. The question I have is, does Common Council, do they want to hear the process? Yeah.
They will.
Alder Ramsey, yeah. Okay, so should we
They're
go
gonna
to?
wanna, they're gonna wanna see something.
No, well, I'm asking, should we go to Common Council the next time you guys meet to kind of explain where we're at right now, to give an update on?
Good idea.
We wanted detachment, Plan Commission recommended an alternate strategy, okay. Just
So
because
you would like
that's
us
always my
there.
concern
Well,
is,
you should have, you should have
not
plenty of
the-
time to get on the agenda.
Not that Plan Commission necessarily recommended one particular alternate strategy, but there would have to be a strategy that works with staying in the city, and then solving
The
the
one thing
kind of
that we-
conditional zoning and the financial contingencies.
The one thing that I think we're all in agreement on is we're not in favor of the detachment.
Then I would make a motion that, the Plan Commission, recommends against, detachment of the property.
Second.
Okay. Any more questions or concerns about this one?
And then I think just the minutes will reflect the,
The discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the components of what Wayne's suggesting, revisiting the planning, might help with marketing the development. If things have changed that much,
yeah.
no one knows what's gonna happen in there now, and it's sort of changing to the effect that nobody knows what they're buying into. So I think that's a great idea to revisit the plan, think about the utilities and clarify all that. I don't know if it needs to be part of our motion, but I strongly suggest that Plan Commission makes a recommendation for staff.
So you
I
think-
just know, for instance, there's that diagram that shows all of the neighborhoods that continues to be used as part of the marketing. If you look at what was built as part of the Prairie and Farm, it's quite different than what was depicted there. I'm not saying good or bad, but it's just different, and it'd be good to know what the rest of the development is anticipated to look like based on current understanding.
Yep, and it's updating map 5, so that's,
Yeah.
And that was on, I think we discussed that last summer when we were.
Okay, so Taylor, is this good enough for you? All the comments, and Abby would have this in the minutes.
Yeah, and Veerbecker has an updated map. Map 5 is kind of the map that we commonly refer to in our MDP that shows all the different neighborhoods. So we've got an update on the street locations have changed a little bit, more cul-de-sacs in the Farm and Prairie, that kind of thing. So yeah, we can definitely work on getting that approved as part of this whole,
Yep.
kind of like I think, it's a 10-year, it's over 10 years now, so to kind of update where necessary.
Yep.
For sure.
Okay, so the
Would it-
motion
would
is.
it- Well, actually, would it be helpful for the motion to say, recommend against detachment of the property, but support
Discussion by
the
the staff.
concept of the church in that location? I mean, we support the church. It's the utility and annexation issue that we don't agree with.
Okay, so who was the one who made the motion and seconded?
I
Or
motion.
did you-
Motion.
So you agree?
We've seconded.
Oh, yeah, so you agree with that? Okay. Any further discussion?
Just
Yes.
clarification, so does it include, is the motion correctly stated as moved by Paulson, seconded by Hubbard, that the Plan Commission recommends against detachment of the property, but supports the concept of the church at this location? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? Okay, yes.
Question of clarification, when you say the concept of the church at this, what do you mean by the concept?
Well, this is
What are
kind of
you
a concept
including in-
review that the proposed church, and we've only seen just a very limited sketch, that it fits the zoning, looks like it would work in terms of the site.
To support the
Yeah.
proposed land use, is that really what you're getting
Yeah.
at?
The
I would
land-
support the land use.
The land use
question is whether
concept.
the concept includes the water and sewer as.
I think we're talking about the land use.
Yeah, the land
Okay,
use.
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Then I think we should
Clear that
eliminate
So
the-
the
you
land
want
use.
to
The-
change that?
Change the land use concept of the
land
church.
use. Yeah, okay. The concept of land use.
Because approving the concept of the church sounds almost too theological.
We approve the concept. You're talking to a pastor, yeah.
So the concept of the land use. So you want to
Yes.
read the motion again then for we vote on
Moved
it?
by Paulson, seconded by Hubbard, that the plan commission recommends against detachment of the property, but supports the concept of the land use at this location.
Okay, all right. Okay, does everybody know what we are voting on? Does everybody know what we are voting on? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously.
Good catch.
Thank you for your time and thank you for your input.
Thank
and,
you guys, I know this is.
And you guys will work with the staff and we will move forward.
And do you want us to come to the council meeting then?
Well, if it's on the agenda, so we will see, so.
I'd like to just give council an update on where we're at.
Well,
Okay.
the other thing is, your materials are no longer what is being requested. So, do you want me to put the materials that you submitted for this meeting into the packet along with the minutes from the meeting? Or would you like to prepare a new letter reflecting your new proposal?
Can we get back to you on that?
Yes.
When does council meet again?
They meet
2
on the
weeks.
sixth,
Yes, I
and
thought,
the
okay.
deadline for the packet is noon on the Thursday before, but ideally, we would have a little bit of time to review it and get it in.
Oh, definitely, let me
Not
just
the
talk.
usual teaser.
Yeah, if you can get it to us by the end of the week, that would be ideal.
Okay, I will, yeah, well, I'll get an answer to you by then.
Okay.
If we're gonna revise things, I'll get it to you and then.
One other
Thank you.
complication, just
Yes.
I know Wayne and I will both be gone on the 13th. Our first plan commission meeting in August, so I don't know if we'll have a quorum
Is anybody else gonna miss?
if it comes up again.
Everybody else is there, so we
We'll
got
have quorum.
5 of
3,
7.
4, 5, so, okay.
Thanks
we
for the
should be
heads
all
up.
right. Okay, thank you guys, thank you for your time, and thank you for all your work, and, we move on to item number 6.
Another Terrence.
Sorry, I didn't realize there was all these other things in here.
Pardon me?
I didn't realize there was a lot of other supporting documents in there. Sorry about that.
Okay. It is the specific implementation plan for Middleton Center Phase 3, Middleton Center 3 LLC.
So we're very excited that this project is moving forward. There were two
Again,
primary-
thank you very much, really appreciate that, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mhm. Yes.
So
Abby,
there
go
are
ahead.
two primary issues that I just wanted to flag for the plan commission. The first is the parking situation at Hilton Center. I know, we support reducing parking overall, but I did wanna flag it because it's quite, what is happening right now at Middleton Center Phase 1, in my opinion, is quite a bit different from what the plan commission approved, which was a shared parking analysis and a parking management plan. And what I saw when I went out and did, counts there is parking that's really specific to the user. The lift and slide stalls, which were initially, of course, proposed by the developer, aren't functioning in the way that they anticipated. And so one of the things that they are proposing, I think, is to remove the lifts. I personally, having seen what they look like and saw that they were all vacant on the uppers, all 3 of the times that we went out to count, I think that probably makes sense at this point, because the bottom lifts are encumbered now, because they can't accommodate a larger vehicle or even a medium-sized vehicle. So I think that makes sense. My primary concern is that there is very little parking available for the commercial tenants. And our understanding, and we went through all the iterations of the parking management plan and the shared parking analysis, was that we were doing shared parking at this mixed-use building, and what I saw was not shared parking, it was individually signed for permit holders. There were very few parking stalls at the ground level, covered parking stalls at the ground level that are kind of available for anybody to use, and those were always full when I was there. So I think there are about 10 or maybe a dozen stalls on that surface level.
Phase
Um,
one or?
Phase one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was kind of trying to use phase one to gauge what the demand might be for phase three, which I realize is difficult. And the last I'd heard from John Hepner was that phase two, I think, was 30% and 38% full. So, that's not really gonna give us a good sense of what the parking needs are in the development overall. We are very happy with the way phase one and phase two have turned out. It's really been transformational for the downtown. We're excited to see how it interacts with the plaza. I think it's a great project. It looks amazing. The other thing that I would like to flag, that we talked about at our TIF staff meeting yesterday, and that I think our TIF consultants and also other people on our TIF team were pretty concerned about, was the amount of surface parking that occupies especially the eastern building. It's covered surface parking. And the concern, of course, is the pedestrian experience when you're walking along Terrace Avenue, west of Parmenter Street, heading toward the Capitol Brewery. So much of that front facade of that eastern building is occupied by parking at the ground level, and there are windows. So if you look at the elevation drawings, it looks like a storefront, but actually if those windows are, if you can see through those windows, what you would be seeing would be a parked vehicle. One of the ideas that I talked with John about was, could there be some sort of sculptural element or something that would be set in from the glass, maybe a foot or something that would block the view of the car and give the pedestrians something exciting to see other than parked vehicles. So two biggest concerns, parking and whether the current parking management plan is being adhered to, and then what the pedestrian experience is along Parmenter Street.
So John, do you want to answer these comments? Go ahead and there and.
Actually, just with that, can I ask
Oh,
Abby a
okay.
question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did staff have any concern about the reduction in buildings from 3 to 2? And how it works on the site?
I didn't hear as many concerns about that. I think because the parking ramps are not connected below grade, that would be, to me, if the underground parking were connected, if it were possible to connect those two, I would think that would be a bigger issue, because it would allow the whole development, the whole phase to function better. Right now, what's being proposed is for somebody who's in one apartment, they have to park in the other building, walk out at the sidewalk level, and then go into the other building to get to their unit. So, but unfortunately, it's not really possible for them to connect those two underground parking levels because of a utility easement, I think, a public utility easement that cuts between the two. So I didn't hear as many concerns about going from 3 to 2.
Any other?
I want to flag that later just for discussion about how that
Okay.
works. It's the same number of units? Apartment units?
The number of units from the GIP has increased by 3, I believe, but we've decreased, or we're requesting an ability to decrease the amount of retail.
Oh, okay, so,
So it's essentially the same. You
The-
decrease some and increase the
The
other.
parking, well, regarding parking, it would actually decrease the parking requirement by 3 stalls.
Okay, because.
I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, and Mark's scrolling around in here.
I'm trying to find where to
I know.
go here.
We'll want to see, we'll want to think on the site plan of the 2 buildings versus the 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily against it, but the parking's the big issue. So.
Abby, where's the site plan? I've been, where can I find the site plan?
I think it's up back.
Call
I'm
which
sure I'm
page the
close.
site plan's on.
There we go.
All right, thank you.
Abby, do you feel the
That-
best way for me to run through the parking
Yeah,
is by starting with your staff comments that we addressed? Okay. So, we were requested to verify that, so I think I'll start by saying that I had to do a bit of investigation myself to look back on what the requirements or what was agreed upon for, or within the parking management plan, and how our operations staff had been managing the parking situation there. And so in discussing some things with them, I learned some things that were being done differently than were required in the parking management plan, and as a part of that, we're requesting a few amendments, and I have some explanation as to why. So the first item that staff had requested some clarification on or verification on were whether or not we had the 4 community cars on site that had been agreed upon. So initially, we had been working with Zipcar and Community Car. Community Car was purchased by Zipcar, and Zipcar is a for-profit company, and they were actually either at capacity or uninterested in this particular location for their community cars, because they rely on customers just like any other business would. So, and of course, we tried to convince them that this would be a great area for a community car, and that there would be plenty of people to provide plenty of customers, but we weren't able to convince them. So we were then left to try and find a way to provide our own community cars, and we found that to be very, very difficult from an insurability perspective. It's extremely expensive, and frankly, we have not been able to find an insurance company that would insure multiple users on a vehicle, how to determine if they are licensed, their own personal insurance, et cetera, becomes really difficult to govern. So most recently, we've actually been working with Van Nutt at Zeroology, and I know those conversations are ongoing right now. So I guess my long answer is we're still working on it, but it's been met with some difficulty. Any questions on that?
I was gonna ask, when was the agreement signed to incorporate community cars? That was before Uber, right? Because I think
well,
everybody
that's a good
believes that
question.
community cars are going away.
Mm-hmm.
That business model is kind of dead. Now that there's Uber and Lyft and rideshare.
Well, and I would agree. I was actually just Googling other community car type companies, or there aren't many in the Madison area any longer. The next item that staff had requested some verification on was whether or not we had been providing 50% discounted bus passes to restaurant employees who rely on public transportation. The answer is yes, those are available, and the restaurant owners are aware that they can assist in purchasing, and we'll provide 50% of that cost, or we'll pay for 50% of that cost.
Is anybody using it?
How many of those have been used?
None so far.
So
So you're not marketing.
That really surprises me, because I remember that we got a request to extend bus service to the downtown until 11 p.m., so there has to have been at least.
That was a part of as I recall, that was a part of our parking management plan. And so we were hopeful that I believe at the time that the parking management plan was being agreed upon, that request was going through as well.
That was also when we had Pasquale's that was gonna open up the tequila bar. Oh, sorry, yep. That was back when we had Pasquale's that was gonna open up their tequila concept where Hellbox went. So now it's Long Table, they don't open that late, and they're actually having problems finding, it's that workforce housing issue that, I'm not sure if you've heard about, or I'm sure, I don't mean that facetiously, sorry. I don't know if you've heard it from me or Terrence, but what we've heard from the Long Table owners is that they're having problems finding, dish staff, et cetera, so they're having to have their waiters, do, double down on dishes and stuff like that, so, and then Hellbox, I think they're not usually open past 7, so yeah.
So do we have buses coming up to 11 now?
I
Mark?
would defer to Mark, but I remember we got that request, and I think it was from one of the businesses via the chambers.
Yeah, and it could have also been in Greenway Center, frankly.
So do we have the buses now coming up to 11 then?
Yeah, there's bus service that late.
I remember those discussions. The purpose was that in lieu of providing a parking spot, you provide a bus pass. But if 0 have been taken up, then there's something wrong.
So, item number 4 that staff had requested some verification on, and I think this is one of the stickier points, but it's, why a majority of the parking stalls are signed for permit parking or temporary parking or 2-hour parking. And, this has really been an adaptation that our property management staff have had to make after listening to both the commercial tenants, customers, and our multifamily tenants. And, essentially without having signage, we're having a difficult time keeping constant monitoring of those spaces. And so we've been juggling how much use of the multifamily tenants or the permit holders, how much usage they have versus the retail and commercial tenants and their customers. And I think right now most of the permitted or signed stalls are the standard parking stalls, but I don't believe all of the surface level lift stalls are permanent parking only. So there are a vast majority of the stalls that are wide open for commercial and retail tenants, employees, customers.
Do you know what the ratio is or the number?
Abby, were we able to pull up my,
It should be in the packet.
Oh, it is?
Thought that I included that as an attachment. It was like, I think it was entitled like parking analysis or something.
Yeah, I remember seeing it.
let's see, yeah, I've got a lot of materials here.
But do you know roughly it's
Is that it?
50/50?
No, keep going down.
It says parking analysis.
Oh, yeah, that, it might be that one.
Yeah, I think that was.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's the document. Is that the document you were talking about, John?
No, I thought there was another that actually showed the number of lift stalls versus standard stalls.
Get into the PC folder, Mark.
I don't know if, because I'm not sure if we ever counted the number of permitted or traditional stalls. So, well,
Their question's more the 2-hour.
yeah, so
2-hour distance.
yeah, I'm not sure I know Abby, I thought you had, with staff's counts of the actual parking usage, was there some information in there on how many stalls were permitted versus?
It looked like pretty much everything at ground level, at least from my recollection, was signed either for permit parking or, what I found humorous, large vehicle parking. There were
That's
some
his-
I've
that's
never
his truck.
seen any place that
That's his
gave
pickup
priority
truck.
parking for larger vehicles, but I saw that in there.
The large,
And then I think the lift ones above, I don't remember seeing any signage on those, but they weren't, I don't think anybody was parking in them.
John's kind of spoken to this, but part of the problem, or not the problem, but the hurdle with the lifts is that a car above a Jeep Cherokee won't fit in those. And then there's also the familiarity, this isn't Chicago, New York, or San Francisco, this is Middleton, where people have cars, and some people have larger cars, but regardless, even the people in small cars, they don't want to pull in those lifts, so that's where we've resorted to telling our apartment users that have the right car, under a Jeep Cherokee, to park in those lifts, to free up the standard stalls, as we call them.
And I do remember when the lifts were initially being proposed, just so that it's on the record, that our staff raised a lot of concerns about the functionality, the usability, and whether people, would be able to adapt to the technology. And I remember Tyler coming and making the video presentation, showing and saying you guys flew out to California and you saw them and they work really well. So I just wanted to put it on the record that we did raise a lot of concerns with the lifts when they were initially proposed.
I mean, I think that the lifts are a decent solution compared to, I know downtown there's a development on
Yeah,
Johnson
it's-
Street that has the
Deluxe
carousel,
has a fully robotic parking system.
but it's 3 minutes a car. So
Mhm.
this is, so then, you know, you're leaving at 8 o'clock, you're now in a line for an hour and a half trying to get your car out. So these lifts work well, but it's just the familiarity of, you know, if your grandma's coming to go to Long Table or something, I don't know, maybe
Right.
mean and whatever. People that are, you know,
Right.
some people are like,
Chicken
"Oh, I
egg
don't
and
care."
People have not
But
adjusted
the-
to
but
that.
The reality is, and I talk to, you know, whatever, my friends, my wife's friends that come to Middleton Center and they love all the shops there. No one wants to park underground, regardless of whether it's conventional stalls or lift stalls. No one I know, I force my wife, I'm like, no, we gotta pull down underneath, down the garage, because we gotta keep cars off the street when we come to Middleton Center. So it, you know, the perception, it's not whether there's lifts or standard stalls. The issue is that it's a garage parking for retail use, and retail users don't wanna park there.
Well, I mean, to give an example, in Madison, Trader Joe's has like one of the tightest underground
Yes.
parking
Yep.
I've ever been in. It's incredibly uncomfortable, but it's always full.
Yes.
So from my perspective, it would make more sense to require the residents to use the lifts than the commercial visitors. I mean, if
That's
you
what we
have
do.
somebody visiting a retailer, they're not gonna learn how to program a lift.
That's exactly, and that's, sorry, and if I wasn't clear, that's exactly what we do. Is for the apartment users, we say you're assigned lift number 200 or whatever, I don't know what the list is.
Yeah.
87 or whatever.
And those are the
they know-
surface level lifts too.
Yeah, and they know to pull into those, and then that's why
Right.
we've tried to sign, our property management team has tried to sign, you know, for guest parking, so that the people that don't wanna get familiar with those lifts can pull in those guest slots.
So who's supposed to be using the upper lifts?
Upper lifts are,
So the majority of those have been turned off because we had been having functionality problems with them, and then trying to get Park Plus, to try to get them to come out in a timely manner to fix those lifts was becoming very difficult and time consuming for our own staff. So we had turned them off, also seeing that there was an adequate amount and surplus parking in the basement. We knew that we didn't need those upper level lifts to be functional, to have enough parking for the demand.
so there's 61 apartments, right? And of that, we have
61 apartments in which phase?
62
one.
in phase one.
Phase two, we have like a lot, I'll get to that one in a second, but for phase one, the stalls we have are what lifts? 81, we have 81 lifts, which means roughly.
So
simple
subtract
math,
32 of those, and
Right.
that's what we've currently been working with.
Yeah, so it's roughly 50 conventional,
It's-
lower lifts that the residents can park in. So we haven't, it's not, in my mind, in talking to property management, and, you know, yeah, there were some glitches, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was the upper stalls weren't needed because we could park all of our residents that had cars in the lower slides.
Do apartment residents have to pay per car for parking?
No.
No, it's included.
As part of the
Agreement, right.
E and SIP.
Right. And
can't
their,
charge for
their
parking.
spots are not assigned, like, this is your spot because you live in apartment number 42, this is your slot?
We have.
Are those signed?
As I understand, we've been trying to assign stall, like if it's the lift and slide parking stall, let's say you have a sedan that fits in the stalls, we'll say, yeah, you park in slot 80.
There's nothing that would stop them from just parking in one of the visitor spots?
Other than we have,
Parking monitoring,
we
but
have
Parking
parking
monitor.
stickers on everybody's car, so we know who's,
Okay.
so we do
I remember
send,
that.
we do send property managers down to.
best efforts. So I think a part of what makes the upper level lifts being shut off more beneficial is that we also do not have to deal with that parking gate every time somebody wants to pull into those stalls. They don't need to go swipe their fob. The gate is up. So they're able to just pull in. It's much more convenient than if they were trying to pull into one of those surface level stalls. Then when they had to go up and swipe and then wait for it to go up and then go in. So they're kind of, they're unencumbered now to just pull right into them, so they're more inviting.
So it
There's a-
looks like you will end up removing those sooner or later.
Well, we would, as Terrence has said, he wants to leave the majority of the structure itself in case this is something, well, A, it costs money to remove these.
Yeah.
But
and
B, if they are needed in the future, we could do some, we could add the gate back on so that they could be used again. But what we've been finding with, we found a 39 vehicle surplus on any given day over a 2-week period, and based on the city's 1-day parking log, they found there to be about a 49 stall surplus. So it's our thought that with Middleton Center Phase 1 being nearly 100% occupied, and given the amount of surplus we have, that this reduction isn't going to inhibit people from parking. I think a bigger piece of it is continuing to educate and request our retailers to recommend their customers, their frequent customers, to go park underground and utilize those spaces.
And they don't need a fob to get into the
No,
underground?
no, nope.
Okay, I have another question though, and that is,
After hours, sorry, I should specify.
Oh,
So if it's
okay.
like past 9 o'clock.
For
just building
security purposes.
oh, right,
We don't want people parking.
But that's
there.
after the hours of the majority of the
Yeah.
businesses.
But the glitch around that is you just walk down the ramp. I've done that.
so how does this affect the CDI grant that the city applied for and passed through to T-Wall Properties for installation of the Lipton site?
So I'm already working with WEDC, and the overall, the purpose of the CDI grant being awarded was because the city and the private developer found there to be a greater need for parking, and so that doesn't go away. The original purpose was going to be to assist in paying for lift and slide parking. Well, in this case, it would go to assist in paying for the underground parking. So it's still for the same need. So I'm working with WEDC on that right now. Of course, I don't want to get too deep into that conversation with them until we verified that we had an agreement on amending the parking requirement.
It's for phase 2, right?
That's for phase 3.
Oh, you're working on one for phase 3?
The CDI grant is for the CDI grant was for to make up the remaining parking requirement in phase 3 for Middleton Center as a whole.
I thought the CDI grant was for phase 2.
We can, it was,
Nope,
I
it's not.
recall that it was paid to phase 2. Anyways, we
Okay.
can look into that, cause I also recall us trying to get the CDI grant for the town square.
We have not received a grant yet.
There you go, that's the better.
You have to pay, just like the other grants, you have to show expenditures and then request reimbursement. So as of right now, we have the CDI grant still awarded. We've signed, or we've received extensions on it as well. And those extensions go out until early 2020.
So we'll follow up with you on that then.
Respect to the parking, one thing I've heard from a number of folks coming to downtown Middleton is they're unaware that there's parking available there. Is there some way to provide some signage to just make folks aware that that parking is there?
It says guest parking. I did look at, because I thought I've seen in other cities, like I was in Florida, and I think I shared the picture that Abby, but there's like big signs that say how many parking stalls are available just to kind of advertise.
Entice, yeah.
I recall the cost being too high, but but right now it does say open to visitors of Middleton Center and guests. And it says it on the garage door too, but I mean, it's just getting people familiar with parking underground. I know my thing has also been educating the retailers on, within 2 blocks, there's 180 public stalls. Within 3 blocks, there's another 100 stalls. Within 5 blocks, I think there's like 450 stalls within 5 blocks of Middleton Center. So it's, also educating people on, hey, when you go to West Town Mall and you park over by Sears and you walk into Williams-Sonoma, that's the equivalent of walking from here to Park Street, just so you don't think about it when you're in a downtown setting. So it's just kind of reorientating people. So I know that Long Table and some of the other retailers have been handing out like brochures on where they can park, you know, hey, there's parking stalls underground Middleton Center, but also in the surrounding area.
So I guess I have a question about the parkings. So it sounds like originally the development was approved based on a number of stalls, and currently those stalls, some of the stalls are not able to be used because they're turned off. So what is the ratio of parking to the proposed development, or in terms of where we're at now? I think is there a deficiency now, or are you saying there isn't one? And I can see why the staff are questioning the parking in phase 3 if you're proposing less parking from the get-go. So can someone kind of clarify all of that for me?
So what we're proposing, or what we're requesting an amendment to, would create a deficiency per the parking management plan. What we have found, and that I think staff is also finding, is that there is a large surplus just in Middleton Center Phase 1, kind of like as our test case, because Middleton Center Phase 1 is nearly 100% occupied. There is an enormous amount of surplus parking on any given day, which is why we are requesting, and that's been with these 32 upper level lift stalls turned off.
And we've done surveys during the day and at night?
So, we went out and checked the numbers at 3 different times of day. One was during a weekday at noon, one was a weekday at 2, and one was a very busy weeknight. That always happens during a plan commission meeting.
What did you do, Mark?
That must be a good omen.
One was a very busy weeknight. It was the Shop and Blues night at about 7:30 p.m. I am not concerned that overall in phase 1 that there's a parking deficiency. Where I am concerned is that there may be a parking deficiency, or at least a perception of a deficiency, for people who are visiting Long Table and Mes Amis and Journeyman. Because the stalls that appear to be for the commercial tenants were full every time that we went. They were completely full. There was not one stall that was available. So that's when you pull into the ramp and you take a right and then head left, and those are the ones that are at grade. Those were always full. It's when you have to go into the underground, which at least to me feels like it's more geared toward the tenants, and they were signed, the stalls were individually signed for permit holders. So if I'm
does
going
give
to
that
eat
perception.
at Long Table, I'm not a permit holder, and I feel like I can't go in there because I don't have a fob or anything to swipe. So I'm gonna head to the right, and all of those stalls were full. So I guess the concern that I'm raising is that, are we giving short shrift to the commercial tenants within the development? And also, I feel like what was agreed to by the plan commission was shared parking, and I don't think that that is what's happening in phase 1. I also remember a conversation about phase 1, we may be a little short, and then phase 2, we're probably gonna start to catch up, but phase 3 is where we're gonna make up the rest of it, and it seems like the deficiency just keeps getting pushed to future phases. And since we haven't seen phase 2 full, we don't have a full picture of what it will look like.
Okay.
So,
Phase 2 has 160 stalls and only 98 apartments. We've removed 20,000 square feet of commercial space in that development for 14 apartments. There's more apartments. What we're finding is the apartment users aren't the issue. They're parking there at night. They're gone during the day. And what you're looking for is the retail users, which are, to be quite honest, it's 14,000 square feet out of 200,000 square feet. It's tiny in the scheme of the whole development. And if there's gonna be somebody who's impacted, honestly, it's the retailers, but it comes down to us, right? It would be us who we can't get the rents that we wanted because these retailers can't survive. And that is not the case from what we've understood from all the retailers. Our retail space is 100% full. And Long Table complains, I'm sure, at times about busyness down there, but that was also back when we had construction of phase 2. Phase 2 construction's done. There's now that whole under building parking, 46 stalls under building in phase 2. That's where I park live in Madison, come to Middleton Center all the time, on the weekends, constantly, I always park under building, because there's always parking there. And that's where,
In phase two.
in phase two.
And that's an additional
that's where-
46 stalls that are now open and very visible to the public.
And that's where Long Table, and Long Table's been, you know, a sole proprietor. He's doing phenomenal. He's outpacing all of his projections. And so parking's not impacting. Amazing.
That's because of Mark Opitz. He drinks enough beer there to put him in the black.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
our retailers are, you know, they're doing
Thank
great,
you.
and so they're not impacted by parking. And so this is where, you know, if we're talking about, you know, perception's not something I
versus
can
the-
change.
Right.
And that's where I'm talking about the perception of, you know, Westtown people will park miles from their car and not think anything of it, but downtown, it's somehow they hold it as some kind of different standard. And that's something that we can't change as the developer. But if the reality is that we have this surplus, and the reality is we're 100% full in retail and we're getting the rents we want, and as the city's concern with TIF is, we're exceeding the TIF value that we projected originally back in 2015, then there isn't a concern. If anything, it's the TIF amendment, the third amendment to the TIF agreement states that we anticipate there being some true up in parking, and that we'll pay for a parking study. So if that's the direction that you guys want to go, is having Walker parking study or somebody who's better, and no offense, I don't think Walker is the best, but anyways, some competent parking analysis done. It says in that third amendment to the TIF agreement that we'll pay for that. And I think, I can't speak for Terrence, he probably doesn't want to pay for it, but I think that would be something reasonable to say, hey, you know, your parking plan originally said X. The reality is Y. Let's take a look at it now. And I think, Abby, you're right. Right before phase 3 is an appropriate time to have a comprehensive look, because once phase 3 is constructed, I don't know how to say this, but there's like no changing it, right? I mean, we can't add much parking at that point. So maybe now is the time to say, do you guys want us to go and engage a third-party consultant to revise what the parking plan is, or to look at?
So if I remember the discussion on phase 2, one of the questions was, do we think of the development as a whole? And the idea of shared parking was that a deficit in one phase could be made up by a surplus in another phase. So, I mean,
I think we're not finding that deficit though in phase 1.
right. I mean, my view, which I've said multiple times, is I don't think we should have parking minimums, because I don't care. I think it's up to the developer if you're gonna get the rents or not. But there's this perception amongst a lot of the voters who call Alderperson Olson, right, that there's not enough parking downtown. And so the real concern is whether customers and tenants are gonna spill out onto the street parking and make life more difficult for other businesses and tenants downtown. So that's the concern.
We have a map, somebody in our office created a map of all the public parking and Middleton Center parking. Was that shared with Abby by chance?
Yeah,
we
we decided, we didn't,
Well, no, I agree,
know
there's
if
plenty of parking downtown.
Yeah.
But I think
It's the
an
perception that people are used to driving and parking right in front of where they wanna go
right.
and not paying anything for it. And, I mean, this is an issue with every urban redevelopment is parking, and how much does each stall cost you, like 30,000?
An underground stall is probably like 36,000.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
I don't care, provide as little parking as you
It's-
want to me, but I'm not the one you have to convince, so.
So we have this map, and John will email it afterwards to Abby, and maybe Abby can get out.
Abby and I reviewed this map as
Okay.
well.
But I mean, this essentially lays out all the parking, and it, you know, it says lot 1 has X stalls, lot 2 has Y stalls, Middleton Center has Z stall, you know, so just kind of explaining. I think, again, it doesn't get at the solution, but if we can start to educate downtown residents that, hey, less than a block away, you can park in the library parking lot at night if you're going to Long Table, and there's tons of parking at night. Easier said than done.
If we do go with a parking study, I think there would be strong support from the staff and the council that the city chooses the consultant, not, right? You don't,
My one concern with a parking analysis too, though, is that I think a lot of the parking professionals are they're not sure exactly where parking standards are going, and I have a feeling it might turn out to be overly aggressive, as agree the Walker study turned out previously, which is, I think, why we're finding this large surplus in our phase one right now.
Well, the problem with and I don't want to totally throw Walker under the bus, but you know, so they had
Chicago
somebody in
versus, or
were they Chicago? I thought they were even coastal.
it was a big city.
The guy we were talking to was in San Francisco. It's like, well, how can you understand what Middleton's like if you've never, you know?
Yeah, and.
But
no,
I
they
leave that
did-
to you guys to pick somebody that you feel comfortable with, you know?
Walker Parking did a downtown study for us because we were getting a lot of requests from the businesses in downtown prior to Middleton Center ever even being conceived, that we needed a parking ramp between City Hall and the senior center. And so Walker came in, and I think there was a perception with them coming in, given that they consult on ramps, that they would recommend a ramp. They would be predisposed to recommend a ramp. And they spent a lot of time in downtown. They met with all the businesses, they met with residents, they did all of the counts. So what you did is probably kind of an updated version of what's in their initial study, because they looked at all of the available parking throughout the whole downtown, and the number of parking stalls that were vacant at any given time. And their recommendation was basically, there's not a ramp that's needed. However, all new redevelopment projects should meet their own needs, because if redevelopments end up generating more need than what they can accommodate within the development, then eventually there may be a need for a parking ramp. So I'm not a big proponent of tons of parking either, please, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to flag what is different from what was previously approved. I almost always walk to downtown when I come down here because I live so close by, but when I do need to come down here and park for a meeting, I can always find a stall available or on-street parking available on Elmwood Avenue or Hubbard Avenue, even when there's a big event. I had to drive down here during the art walk, and I found a stall right in front of City Hall at a time when, the downtown was packed. So please, I'm not a huge advocate for a lot of additional parking demands. What I'm trying to flag is the concern for the businesses and whether your whole parking scenario would function better if you just opened it up like what was previously
Agreed to.
agreed upon, so that everybody could use any stall.
The problem, totally agree. The problem is that assumes that people want to pull down into the underground parking versus, as Kurt says, I've been there where, let's see if there's parking right outside where I want to go first. And then you kind of, you're like a shark, you kind of like drive around. You're like, I really don't want to go down that underground garage. I really don't want to take an elevator. So if you had 100 more stalls underground, I still don't think they'd get used because people don't want to park in underground garages. Now that might be different. I know you guys are looking at the downtown campus plan and looking at maybe putting an above ground ramp, because I've seen that in downtown settings before. But the idea of going down into a private, just the perception of a private ramp. I guess an example is downtown in the Lucky Building, if you've ever been to Fresh Market. It feels weird, or go to Buffalo Wild Wings. It feels weird to pull down into an apartment building's underground parking. And it took me a while to get used to that the first time I ever did that. But it's, again, it's a perception problem, I think, is what it is. And I think if we put a ton of parking in phase 3, if you added a parking garage over in phase 3 instead of a development, I still don't think it'd really get used as much, because it's that whole perception thing of.
So I guess the argument that you're making, at least from what I'm hearing, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you're saying the commercial customers won't use the ramp. Why wouldn't you just not sign it then? I mean, if your concern is that they wouldn't use the ramp, why not open it up and let it be used for anybody who does decide to wander down there?
Because the problem was we were getting too many permanent apartment users. Middleton Center, for example. I wish I had a map. Do we have a site plan of Middleton Center one?
Probably not Middleton
You guys
Center
have been there.
1.
Long Table is close to the apartment elevator. So the apartment residents, they want to park right there so they can get their groceries onto the elevator. Well, the Long Table customers also want to park right there, and so do all the other retailers. So what we did is we zoned that off for 2-hour visitor parking, and we put the permit-only parking towards the other elevator, which is closer to the office and away from where the retailers would use the elevator. So, yeah, building A. Yeah, so people, building B is where Long Table is, that corner, and that's where we have the 2-hour guest parking underground.
Huh?
Because we want to discourage our apartment residents from sitting in a stall all day because, hey, we pulled in this morning after getting back from Willie Street Co-op, we don't want to move our car for the rest of the day. Because what we find is with Uber, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, is when we did the parking study, Uber wasn't around, it was all about Zipcar. Uber's taken over, and we've seen it with all of our downtown projects where we'll have these cars with an inch full of dust. These millennials who never use their car because they use Uber all the time, or they ride share, but they still have a car and they park it underground.
So the main point is if there's a surplus of parking, then
And we don't
We really
disagree
don't.
that there have been some adjustments that we've made to accommodate our tenants and the retailers, and like Taylor was just explaining, that was an accommodation that we were trying to make to assist the retailers and feedback that they had given us. We're very confident in the amount of parking that we've seen there, and we're trying to adjust now that we have a fully occupied or nearly fully occupied building, to try and decrease some cost for the next phase, and to give ourselves the flexibility to try and manage this in the way that we have been, and we're open to additional conversation on it as well.
good, so
Oh, wait.
this is to, yes, Kurt, so this is to provide input, and let's see that, how do you look at it, so?
Well, there's two separate issues. You talk about us giving you flexibility, which I'm in favor of, but it sounds like, by what Abby is saying, that some of the flexibility built into the shared parking arrangement in phase 1 and 2 is not actually being complied with. So that's a separate issue. I guess the other question is, if you had to provide a proportionate share of parking in phase 3 that was the same ratio of stalls to space in phases 1 and 2, how many additional stalls would you have to provide in phase 3? I'm trying to figure, what's your deficit number here?
So
Standalone.
for phase 3 right now, if we were able to so we're proposing 84 stalls for phase 3, and we have 65 units. So we actually have a surplus already that we're going to be providing
'Cause
for.
there's no commercial in phase 3.
There's 3,100 square feet, so, which would be about 10 stalls. So if we have 84 stalls, 65 units, so we actually have about 9 stalls. If we're doing a 1-to-1,
Mark, can you show the site plan?
if we're doing a 1-to-1 unit to stall ratio
Yeah, 1-to-1 on the apartments.
on the
That's
apartments,
that's the
then
Madison
we would
standard,
have
yeah.
an additional, what is the math there?
You actually got
19.
21, yeah.
But, and then you're adding commercial, and there would be surface parking
So
for
there's
the commercial?
17 stalls for the, at surface level for the retail space.
For the retail space in phase, right there, in phase. No,
I've seen it, but I think it's in individual buildings.
I mean,
This is building
Yeah,
F.
lower, yeah.
I'm comfortable with the idea that only
down
one
one,
stall per,
There's the, how many is that?
So there should be 17 stalls that would be accessible to the retail, and I think there's 22 stalls total on the surface there.
on the surface.
And a couple are delineated then by the garage.
And you would still have a management plan that essentially prohibits your apartment tenants from parking on surface lots.
Right. Well,
Well, I don't, on this one.
on this
There's
on
so
this
many
one,
different delineate, 'cause you're short, and the underground is 59 stalls.
the underground is,
That's right.
Well,
maybe I can refer to the architect.
if you got 22, so the underground will be, how
I
many?
think what we would do is we would look at, so 300 or one parking stall per
C39.
300 square feet of retail.
Right.
So we would need, I think, 10 stalls of the 22 total that would need to be required for the retailers.
So you got 12 extra on the surface.
At surface, at grade.
Okay.
So you actually
Is it
have-
possible that someone visiting like Long Table in Phase 1 would park on one of these surface stalls? Probably not, because they'd have to cross the
That's not
railroad
good.
tracks or walk, huh?
They possibly could.
Again, I think it has so much to do with, I mean, we have a lot of signage, we even have a lot of signage down in the underground area. We have colored we've tried to make it as inviting and as easy as possible to get customers who have never been there up to the retail locations. I think it has so much to do with educating the retailers and asking them to frequently explain to their customers, hey, come on back and you can park underground next time.
For free.
For free. I don't know if those conversations happen as often as they might or as they could.
Picture of your parking
How about
spot,
valet
get $1
parking?
off your purchase.
So it looks like,
Well, validation would be
Yeah,
great,
valet
except that
parking.
you don't have to pay.
LA parking, then somebody else parks it underground for them. If people are uncomfortable parking underground,
yeah,
which a lot of people are.
I'd almost leave that to
Valet.
the
Oh.
tenant.
Yeah, that's what we said.
I mean, the tenant can bring that up. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
the tenant's having issues, if Long Table's having issues getting people parked, they could pay for a valet, and that's what happens in Chicago. I mean, or most metropolitan areas, I've seen that in Chicago for one, where certain restaurants will have valets,
Valet.
and they pay for it.
so
The landlord doesn't pay for that, I'll tell you that.
No, that's right, that's right.
That's
So
a tenant expense.
from what you have shown here, that you don't really have a parking issue, at least from what you're describing here. So how many apartments are there? 65, and you're providing 84 parking spots there?
Right, correct.
22 on the surface, so
22 on the surface and 62
62 at the
below.
bottom,
61 below.
61. So there are only 4 apartment people who possibly will be parking on the surface.
Well, right, and actually,
Yes.
those 4 stalls are
Mhm.
actually
23 or 16.
within the garage as well. So,
Because the garage door is
so
right
there
there.
are
You see the arrow.
there are 4 stalls on the surface that are actually within the secured garage. And so if you add those to the 62 that are below grade, you have 66 stalls and 65.
Okay, so the
Units.
second issue which Abby had was, that they look like they're parked cars you're going to deal with and see that they don't look, they look good, so.
I think we had discussed this, I think we'd be happy to investigate some way to do some kind of art on there.
Question about that, so, the commercial space is on Parmenter and on Terrace, correct? So,
This is yeah, this
can
is,
you see the vehicles from?
Oh, from that side?
no, this is
No,
Parmenter
no.
right here where the arrow is. That's Parmenter.
Okay,
Here's Terrace. So it's these 10.
Is there
okay.
street parking on Terrace?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
mean,
then, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I've never seen the street parking on Terrace filled.
It can be Capital Brewery events.
Is the commercial space in this building
Expert on.
only in this location on the Parmenter Terrace corner? Or is
Yes.
are there other?
That's it, 3,100 square feet is what we're requesting.
That's the only retail in both buildings, right?
Correct.
All phase 3, that is the sole.
Okay.
And so maybe just to kind of recap, if we were allowed to, our request to reduce the parking requirement by 26 stalls for Middleton Center 3 and be allowed to keep the 32 stalls shut off for the upper levels in phase 1, we would have 225 stalls in the entire Middleton Center development. That would be for the 225 units, and we'd have an additional 132 stalls that would be usable by the retailers, office tenants, customers, et cetera. So a total of 357 stalls.
That will look.
John, are those numbers eliminating the upper?
Yes, yep.
Would it help, and I'm just looking for feedback from you guys, on the one hand, we could have a parking analyst go through and, mark, or do an update on the original plan, or two, we could redline the existing parking management plan for what we're looking to propose with updated charts. I mean, would that help for you guys to visualize what we're looking to change?
I guess that does make sense, doesn't it?
Cause I think they were on 107, if I'm looking at this right, page 107, Mark, maybe?
Page 107 on the pack.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to bring Walker back again, but I think at least you want to redline what you're changing, and let's have a look at it at least the
Somewhere.
first time, so.
I'm interested, Mark and Abby, what would
Yeah.
you find most helpful in terms of being able to come up with a staff recommendation?
Oh, we haven't done, no.
Do you find it helpful to have some consultant look at things or what?
I think actually what would probably be more helpful would be to talk to the businesses
Yeah.
Okay,
and find out how things.
And frankly, I never hear of people complaining at Long Table about parking.
okay, all right, so,
Well, and,
I don't,
like, if you're looking at this, you know,
Okay,
the
so-
car share credit and the restaurant employee bus credit. It sounds to me like you're wanting to eliminate that, so that leaves you another deficit.
Well, we're happy to continue the bus credit.
Because it costs you zero, right? Because
nobody's taking it, right? Not yet.
Well, but we are in compliance with that portion of the plan.
You're in compliance that says you offer it.
Right.
I don't think there needs to be another study. I mean, what we're looking at is pretty
Straightforward, yes,
forward.
yes.
And I would like to continue to work with Abby on how we are able to manage our parking at Middleton Center while having an updated or an amended parking management agreement. Because it sounds like a lot of the confusion and some frustration is that we aren't following all of the requirements of that plan, mainly because of the signing. And I think part of the importance of the signing for us has been ensuring that there is adequate parking for all of the users, and we're finding that without it, that's where confusion and misuse and overuse of particular stalls was occurring.
Okay, work with Abby, and I guess you got, is there any more input which we want to provide now?
Well,
Yes, yes,
I
go
would want you to look at what the result would be of vacating the requirement for community cars.
And how
What that would
many-
look like, if you could turn those into regular stalls,
Okay.
or
They
if
already
there's some-
are, I think, though, aren't they? You guys,
I mean, what that does to
I
your
don't-
math in terms of eliminating the credit, too.
Well, I don't believe we have community card designated stalls right now. If I could update the total reduction that we would be requesting if we removed the credit for community
Right,
cars.
right.
Okay.
That's the point here,
Okay.
so. Okay, so any other things which you want them to look at?
Do we want to review any other portion of the SIP submittal?
Can we look at the architecture and the site plan?
Let's do that.
Okay, so
Well,
let's,
actually more fun than
To
the
close that
parking.
piece, though, thank you for your feedback on that.
okay, so whatever you are redlining, do it, and then let's have a look at that too, so.
Try to simplify it too, because it seems like the.
Yes.
Well, I'm confused.
Yes. I think we had plenty of input now, so
It's
let's
frequent.
move on to the next part now.
Okay,
then, so.
can we look at the site plan, Mark?
Yes, site plan, please now, let's move on that one.
page is that?
I don't.
Should have studied that. Well, here, I think I'm close.
Okay, so you are on to the site plan now. Who is going to explain it? One of
Well-
you guys, or John is, or
You
somebody's
guys
going to
came
do
here
it?
for something, right? I'm kidding.
Well,
Want to go over the materials and the colors and things, that'd be great.
so you have an opportunity
Well, no,
now, so.
I'll let you
No, I just wanted to talk about in terms of the site plan, is that this is different than what was shown on the, no, you had it.
I know, I just was scrolling by.
Making me dizzy.
Oh,
Different than what was shown on this plan in terms of the 2 building to 3 buildings.
Is it higher again?
But I like the fact, you had it, stop moving.
Where? There's a delay, I'm sorry.
There's a delay.
So is it above or below this?
Below.
Are you talking about the original GDP?
Yeah, I mean,
So just
no,
a,
up a little bit.
I know,
Ken.
I know.
Oh, there's a slight delay.
That's,
I like the fact that what But the building is gonna hug the street, and that's where the commercial is gonna be, right?
Yeah.
Along Park.
Correct.
And it's just basically, instead of 3 stacked buildings, it's 2 longer buildings with a kind of wider, is that a storm sewer easement? That's a kind of a naturalized feature in between the buildings?
Yeah, there's an easement that separates the two buildings, but just as a point of clarification. Okay. I will move this then. In the GDP, there were only 2 buildings. So on the lower level and the first floor, it's one contiguous space, and then above,
It's 3 buildings.
the building was connected with a breezeway, for lack of a better term. So since we,
This is the GDP. It says 3 buildings.
I think they're labeled that way, but it's that we didn't do the GDP, so I don't have the labels memorized. But the two buildings closest to the corner that are labeled as 2 buildings are actually 1 building, but that's a technicality.
But they were labeled E, F, and G.
Correct. I don't know why that was. It was 1 building. Not an excuse. We didn't do that, so we had no control. You can see on the, yeah.
Yeah, I see E, F, and G.
Yes, I do too. So those, are you
Okay.
telling me that G?
It was 3 buildings, now it's 2. I mean, it's just semantics, I think.
No, all I'm
The-
saying is when I looked at the site plan, then
Sure.
it doesn't actually. Because I was worried it was going to be too big, too long of a building.
Sure.
But it doesn't feel like that relative to the site.
No, right, and the exterior design and the exterior aesthetics are very similar to what was done on phase 1 and 2. So to break up the buildings, both of the buildings, along their facades into what is to be seen as multiple smaller buildings. So that was the same strategy architecturally, to have phase 3 fit in with phase 1 and 2. Yeah.
There's a sewer easement
There, yeah.
between, a water easement, is that what that is, in between the 2?
Correct.
Water?
Sewer. So we cannot connect the buildings underneath, which we looked into because that would be more efficient with the parking, less ramping and whatnot.
I think that, where the water tower is now, that was one of the original locations of the water tower in Middleton, correct, Mark? I think there's some historic.
That was long time ago before
Right.
Mark.
Okay. I do think that was one of the original, if not the original, storage tank.
So on the landscape plan,
Yeah.
the area between the 2 buildings, is that going to be green space, or is that more like a covered garage-looking thingy?
Did you guys do the landscape plan?
Does that make sense?
So yeah, where the buildings split. So we actually, as part of the SIP, we actually moved the northernmost building as far north as the westernmost building as far west as we could, to increase the amount of space between the 2 buildings to be able to make that more aesthetically appealing. Because we do have a couple of walkout units there too, so that's going to be landscaped, and actually that thoroughfare that splits the 2 Middleton Center 2 buildings will have continuation there.
Right.
With landscaping, seating, et cetera. So we had the Bruce Company actually work up a plan for that, and that should be included in the packet.
So like right there.
Yep, right there.
That'll be
That's great.
landscaped and some stormwater and
Seating area of some sort, which will be a public amenity as well.
that'll be a nice amenity in between.
Yeah, so like I said, the architecture is continuing the theme of phase 1 and 2. High quality materials, as you can see on the renderings in your packet, and these here in front of you that are a little more enhanced with some more artistic stylings. The each of the end components of these buildings will be full masonry from top.
Wait. The masonry is what
There you
you're
go.
showing as on this,
So yeah,
the corner.
so that reddish material is masonry.
And this is the big building as it interfaces with Parmenter and Terrace.
Correct. But that's true for both both ends on both buildings. So not just on Parmenter and Terrace, but on the ends that face that landscape area that you were talking about before, and on the far western end. So the yellowish, for lack of a better term, elements on the ends of the building are masonry as well, as we have here. The entire base of the building all the way around would be masonry, and then the balance would be different colors of fiber cement siding. So high quality materials throughout. We think that we've enhanced and refined the design from the GDP, some of those exterior imagery that you've seen on the GDP. We've worked the plans and the elevations a bit to refine those to be a little more proportionally pleasing and fit in more with phases 1 and 2. So.
Yes, good.
So, when I looked at the site plan, what you're labeling as an F building did not seem too big, but from this perspective 3, boy, that seems pretty long. How many entrances?
It's the railroad side.
Yeah,
This
you're
is
looking at the railroad side there.
No entrances there. But can you show the street side? Wish David
So
Reed
that-
was here, but I mean, the concern is, how do you break up a big, long building that doesn't look?
Right. So if you look at those top 2 elevations there, or perspectives, that's what we're doing with some ins and outs in the building, as well as some material changes and the changes in the massings in some of the detailings in the south, so they look like different buildings. Although they all have a traditional style, they all have some uniqueness in each of the massings.
So there'll be separate entrances on the street.
There'll be an entrance. There'll be an entrance for a main entrance for the residential on one end of the building. Secondary entrance and egress for the residential on the other end. Of course, the retail will have. It depends on the retailer. You know, that will be designed flexible to
Does
put
the
entries.
underground parking garage enter off of the street here? This
Yep.
street?
Yep.
Right, that's off of Terrace.
Yep. That's it right there. Yeah, correct.
Residential units have a front door on Terrace?
Not the units themselves. The building entrance is.
Yeah.
Side a hallway.
Correct. It's double loaded corridor, common corridor building.
Oh, and it's parking there actually, right, on Terrace?
Yep. There's a
Okay.
bit of ground floor parking
Right
there.
here.
Visual.
Yep.
How are those windows going to be treated?
We are anticipating them being clear glass. We've done that before in a couple of projects, and I actually think it's quite interesting. You know, it's different. Pedestrian experience. Personally, don't think it's offensive to look in a window and see in an automobile. It give, you know, it's better than a blank wall. You get views in and views out for security. And it's clear glass, so you're not walking by, you know, it gives some depth to the experience, not just a flat face there. So we were anticipating clear glass.
What was prompting the concern from Abby and me is, you know, you see examples like this. This one's not too bad. Well, this part is worse, the white. I personally can't stand that sort of thing.
Right. I don't care for it either. That's why clear glass, you know, you can see in there.
I mean,
You
the
can
white
see the
glass.
depth of the.
White glass, Mark, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't like this.
So it has sort of
Just
a,
boarded up, it just looks
Okay.
covered, it looks like the
Yeah,
inside
that's-
doesn't relate to the outside at all.
Okay.
Which it isn't, it's probably their kitchen. In fact, I'm sure that's their kitchen.
Yeah, so that's what we don't want.
And then you have this as an alternative, you know, just to have clear with a black, is, you know, tinted. I personally find that a little better. I still don't think it's ideal,
Right.
obviously.
And if it helps, we can show photos of how we've done that in past projects, in the Milwaukee area specifically, and pretty sharp, I think.
And I was just gonna mention too, I think what Abby and I had discussed was that we did have some, on Middleton Center Phase 1 before Hellbox was there, we had some kind of interesting, what I'll call window clings. And if we were talking about potential art there or something like that, I mean, I'm sure we could do something interesting on the interiors of those windows to,
Don't show the Starbucks.
I'm showing how we do different window treatments.
so if, just.
Yeah, we
another
could do
option.
that too. That gets kind of back to it flattens the facade a bit more, takes away that depth of viewing in and out.
So in this example, we had to do this because this ended up, they flipped the building after it got approved by the plan commission, and so they were proposing to just black the windows out completely because this leads into their storage room. And we were in a pinch. Basically what the plan commission recommended is that the arts committee have a design competition, and we ended up paying a small honoraria to a student at Madison College.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense in those situations.
Yeah.
You know, we're in an
Looks
urban
pretty nice,
setting.
so
and-
Right,
looks good.
no, I actually think having a clear glass window is preferable. My proposal was, might there be an opportunity for some kind of, I mean, I think the example that I gave to John was, could there be like a thin laser cut metal panel or something that a local artist would
Sure.
design? So you can still see around it on either side, you can see the vehicles, but it just gives some added visual interest. It was just an idea. I'm not married to it or anything. I think
It's a good idea.
proposing is preferable to just blacking out the windows.
But I do
Okay,
like that
more
idea as well.
input.
So no,
Oh,
it's
wait.
not this one.
Can-
There's another one here that's an example, but we don't need to cover it.
That's,
Somewhere around here in Madison.
there's a difference about whether street level windows are for retail as opposed to apartments. I mean, generally for retail, we want them open, but
Oh,
for
yeah.
apartments, we don't have.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's more parking, so.
Oh, it's because the parking's on the,
There's parking
Yep.
right here.
Yep.
oh, okay.
So that's why Abby and I raised it as a concern. It's just we want to make sure it's done right.
Yeah.
Because this is a major, you know, walkway to Long Terrace is major walking.
I'd like some way that you could, I like your idea, Abby, because you can look around and still see in. Because on the ground level, you know, let's face it, it's a little bit of a safety issue if everything is blacked off or even whited or whatever, but there isn't a way that you can kind of see around, then it, you know, everybody knows that.
No, I actually like the Abby's idea too, some artistic things, so. Michael, you are thinking of some things.
No, I mean, to Abby's point, I think there are a lot of good examples about, that you could use in that regard. I mean, Exact Sciences, you know, some of the metal panels that they use on that new parking structure that they're building, you know, along the belt line, but something that's more artistic, not just, you know,
Sure.
repetitive pattern. It's also a southern exposing elevation, you know, any merit in any kind of green wall, you know, to break up that facade, just because it is so long. Again, you don't have that element during the winter months, of course, but, you know, in the summer when there's a lot of activity there, you know, just some green panels.
Yeah, that could be.
What's the Domain downtown on Johnson, you know, it's got some of those trellises that they've got some greenery that grows up on it, something else to help break that up as a possibility.
Jennifer is thinking something. Yes,
I agree.
Jennifer.
I think something like that might be helpful. I don't like the idea of making it look like everything else, even though it has parking within it. That's just my personal preference. I mean,
Showing different examples.
it's not really what the function of it is inside, it's parking, and so to make these little residential windows denote sort of a ground level access to something friendly, and it's a parking garage. I don't know, I don't really,
Well, they're not ground level residential windows, they're storefront windows.
right, but they look like
So
they
they
are.
continue the pattern.
The other issue, I mean, I think, you know, we have to be sensitive to the other side of the street as well, where the residences are, and
Yep.
think about how we can do that a little bit in this corridor. It's important to preserve the historic preservation elements. And so the building itself, I don't know, in terms of that long elevation, I was thinking about the different classical elements you might have incorporated, but maybe there's a way you could either, you know, don't try to mimic some of the classical elements across the street, or you do, just to tie it better in with the neighborhood.
Yeah, I was just gonna go to
I think I really like her, that second point, it is pretty important. Because all that
Concur.
neighborhood, you know, they would be, you want to make them happy and keep them happy, so.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, you know, that's a reason we chose not only to
That's not his.
tie it into the first and second phase of Middleton Center, but in traditional aesthetics, but that's what the whole neighborhood is too, right? You know, it wouldn't be appropriate to do pitched roofs, for instance, so we're keeping that traditional aesthetic, even though it's a flat roof building. We're not going with contemporary architecture.
Yeah, and that's where if you totally, you know, if you don't, you're sort of stuck in the middle, so I'm just suggesting, it is a long expanse, and the middle ones in particular, I'm having issues with because they don't have a top on them. They're sort of, but there's other examples. Mark was just kind of driving around the city or walking around the city, and you can see them all over. I don't know. I'm just thinking through whether or not you really want to take the extreme classic elements of the architectural benefits of the street, or you say these middle pieces are really, you know, not part of that language, and you do something different with them. And right now, because they don't have tops, they're not quite speaking the same language.
If I could just speak to that a little bit, I mean, I think the direction that JLA recommended was to try and stick with the theme of the Middleton Center redevelopment a little bit as well. Another piece of this is that we are planning on putting solar on the roofs here, and we found that pitched roofs are not as conducive to solar, and therefore may make it financially infeasible. And this is a really strong candidate for solar, phase 3 right now, and we're actually in the process of putting it on phase 1 and phase 2 as well.
Yeah, so the idea was, you know, to emphasize those ends more, with the detail and the heavy cornice line in that, and then those middle parts to be, I guess, more subdued. And I think we just saw some imagery of
And
phases 1 and 2 that had that same,
Step back in the middle.
yeah, so.
Yes, Dan, you have something?
You know, I'm not an architect, but looking at it, it just seems very flat with a couple indents here and there.
Yeah, it's, if you go back to that last
it just,
photo.
The actual,
Yeah, the phase 1 or 2. So
So is
this
it
is
gonna be
hard
more
without a
like
pointer,
this with a
but
different
yeah, the
profiles?
right where that cursor is, or any of these, that's the sort of relief we're having, you know, anywhere from that 8 inches to a foot, I believe. You know, it's a really tight site. Depth-wise, we're really from property to property line, that's like the minimum for a multifamily to fit parking down there. So there's not a lot of room. So this is the kind of relief in those in those
that was-
segments that
This
we're
relief
doing.
is also indicated at ground level because you have different storefronts with different,
Correct.
but this is gonna be all one apartment block. How long along Terrace Avenue is this building?
John, do you know that offhand?
We can compare it on the,
Yeah, it should be on the plan too.
I mean, in essence, it's the equivalent length of buildings A and B in phase one.
there's the,
There you go.
well, we could look at this. I was gonna go to the one that had the, yeah, I think it was 73, if I remember right. I was thinking of the color drawings. Oh, also the, we could go to the landscaping plan that had the other buildings. You know what I mean? The blocking, where was that? Is it up here? Sorry. I think it was up here.
There were dimensions on the floor plans.
But you heard Councilman Ramsey's
Well, this
concern that it feels
this answers
One
your
big,
question.
flat,
long,
like one
flat
big
building.
flat.
I mean, I don't, to me, it looks kind of done. Like, if you go back to the picture, is there anything you can do around the windows to give it some kind of depth? As you look at that picture, it just looks like one long, flat building. And, you know, it's,
What I was
On
gonna
the
point out,
perspective drawing.
this, I'll go back to it. This here obviously is similar in length to this. But this, I mean, this is where the walkway is, so this is gonna be one building, right?
Correct.
So it's about
Was
what,
this the
50?
revised plan?
This is, well, no, I'm just showing the massing compared to what was built over here. So this is about, what, 50% longer? Maybe not quite.
That's
How much?
huge.
But this is not, what you're just showing there was the original plan, not.
Right, but the concern was the scale and how long the building is. So I'm just trying to make a comparison to this.
Sure.
That's the point. Whoops, sorry.
It's about as long as that, or it's longer than that?
Well,
It's
actually, this
kind-
is the way to look at it. So this is where the gap, where the walkway is, and that's gonna continue over here. So this from the cursor right here to here will be one building.
So it's gonna be like.
Right.
So it'll be
Like two
about
buildings, I guess.
40% long, additional length.
Sure. But the strategy of breaking that length down is the same, right?
Right. With the same roof treatments where you
Right.
variegate, where you have a
Correct.
variety in both the materials here, but then at the roof line, I noticed that. It's basically the same thing.
Well, but there's,
I'll go to it.
at the corner of Parmenter and Hubbard, there's that kind of clock tower type cap.
Yep.
Which you're not showing in the corner of Terrace and Parmenter.
Right. Because we don't want to devalue the existing one. So if you put a tower everywhere, a tower isn't special.
So you're not trying to make it sort of symmetric, so this.
Yeah, so, I mean, the idea here was to continue the third phase and complete Middleton Center, and to have it relate, obviously, to the first two phases, and to become part of the fabric of that, right? Not to be this architectural masterpiece unto itself, but to be part of the fabric of the downtown.
Okay.
So that's why we continued some of those themes. We have some site constraints that don't really allow us to physically break that into two buildings. That other, the one on the corner. So that resulted in the technical length of the building, but trying to break it up in length, similar to what was done on the first two phases.
So when you had
That's what we're
something.
doing.
What about adding some height to some of it? Adding a fourth?
Well, I think part of adding height to it starts to decrease your step down from into the neighborhood. And I think that's something that we had originally received feedback on, and which is, it's probably why we're at 3 stories here versus 4, where you're closer into the downtown, because it provides a nice step down into the 2- and 3-story homes across the street.
Also,
That
I don't know
part
if you
is very
have.
good. It's going to go with the neighborhood much better than anything higher than 30. And I remember when we had those, conversations and hearings, people like this much better than before, so.
Plus, I don't know if
Right.
you have in this packet the imagery of the GDP of this same building, but that was higher. It was still three stories, but the proportions were odd, just for lack of a better description. So the proportions, height versus
Say there,
width are much more pleasing here and more traditionally acceptable than maybe, just to give you some comparison to, if we were to add some height on that, I think proportionally it would look kind of,
so you're
out
varying
of
the
place.
height in this image here,
Yep,
which it was a little harder to see that in the perspective.
right.
See, I think having a fourth story for part of it actually would help break up that length of the building. But I understand what the mayor's saying about the original commitment, but that was also before, when we had an empty slate. There was nothing, now people have seen the product.
Would it be feasible to add a stepped back fourth layer on at least some of the building with maybe a single loaded apartments? Oh, then that gives you more apartments and more of a parking gap. Yeah.
Trying to set us up.
You can have more parking. You can have more apartments if you have more
Yeah.
parking. Yeah.
Rooftop uses.
Yeah,
Does anyone do single loaded apartments on one story anymore?
Not if they don't have to.
You could have a couple penthouse, or you'll have lofted units for those.
Considered rooftop gardens or anything on the building?
they plan to put
No.
the solar panels.
Units.
Just,
From-
yeah.
So
Have it be a
no.
two-story townhouse style.
I think other than looking very long, that's, the others have the same concern, I guess. The other points have been made, so.
What if they were lofted units? What if there was a
Couple
two-story
of them on the top.
townhouse, so you take the third floor, it's access there, you don't need an elevator then. You got stairs inside to get to a lofted, would there be a market for some people to, have a 3-bedroom?
Perhaps.
Lofty idea.
Joe, I'll defer to you, but in looking at this, I would think you'd have to consistently place lofts all the way along the entire expanse of the building. If you did it in only a few places, I think it would look really wonky.
You'd essentially be taking this part and go, or it doesn't matter which part you choose. Basically, well, anyway.
Yeah.
maybe
So
it's-
the feeling is some more height variation would help with the concern. Am I?
That what
The
So-
mayor is suggesting that might cause some concerns. with
Right. I was gonna say that's gotta be a first time I've ever had a plan commission push me for more height.
Well, no one's pushing it, but I agree with what the mayor said. I mean, that was part of the original deal.
The GDP had the height limits,
It was
right?
part of the original deal, but, I haven't heard anyone complain about how this has turned out. And so it'd be curious to ask, there's 3 or 4 houses
Step
across
back
the
really
street.
worked.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 houses across the street, maybe it wouldn't be hard to say, hey, would you rather look at a long, that wouldn't be that hard to gauge that opinion.
You're saying do
Yeah.
a step back?
Well, if the concern, what I'm saying is, if the concern is that it's too long and too level, even with some minor variations, having a couple that bump, that, where you have a more vertical element, which could, I think, just be, I would think there'd be a market for some people who would want a townhouse style on the top floor.
I will defer to my clients for that.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is that there's enough going on with the design of that facade, both in breaking up of the massing, in the material changes, the ground floor,
Well, whatever.
fenestration, and the small variation in the roof line, that's all enough to get an interest and some vitality to the building, even though it's long. I would totally agree if it's monolithic material, not broken up, absolutely. But in my opinion, it's, as far as the length of the building, that wouldn't, you can argue aesthetics, you know, and that's so subjective too. But as far as breaking up the building, in my opinion, obviously,
The last elevation
it's
you
broken
had
up.
up, Mark, there was a green
Going back.
colored building. Yep, the one right where your arrow is. I'm wondering if you put, you know, a more formal cornice on that, if it
Mhm.
will help a little bit.
sure, it could.
You mean something like this?
Yeah, or the one that's on the,
Yeah.
Yeah, it would make a difference, yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to, and that could be, that would, it would look nicer, for that element.
Sorry.
Part of the reason was to help make each of those elements look more different than each other. Putting a cornice, you know, on that, like we have on the brick mass, will make it look more similar, but I don't think it will look worse. I think it would look better, actually. So,
Well, you think you guys had enough input, or you like some more?
take as much as you want to give us.
Anybody else?
It does make the big picture is just looking for more breakup of that whole face.
Sure.
It's in depth, height.
Okay.
But
Window shape,
looking for
something that-
greater variety to break up the monolithic shape.
Okay.
yeah, even in this elevation, you see the awnings on the storefronts mimic where this courtyard is on the second floor, and so it provides a little bit of a, you know, that there's some depth to the, more depth than the reality of it, in a way. And on that other the facade on phase 3, I guess we can't tell, of course, what the awnings might be like, but that might be a way to undulate the,
Sure. Yeah, we do have awnings. Maybe it's just emphasizing them more.
Lee, if you have something you want to share,
Did you want to look at the landscape plan?
Yeah, right.
okay, anyone else who wants to provide,
Are we supposed to make a motion to?
it's
or
for
just
the input, I
recommendation?
guess, Abby, isn't it?
It's just feedback?
It's the feedback. Unless you guys want some motions, so,
Or
okay.
It sounds like the primary issues that have been identified are resolving the parking issues and just architecturally the variety on that face along Terrace, right?
So John, are you happy with, or do you want anything more now?
No, appreciate the feedback, and I think Abby and I will continue to
Work
work
with Abby
together.
and let's finalize that and move through. Okay.
Sounds good.
Anybody else want to provide final input or want to make any motions or anything? Okay, then we move on to item number 7.
Thank you all.
thank you.
Letter of intent for the purchase of 2413 and 2417 Parmenter Street, Milton, Wisconsin, Conservancy Bend Residences, LLC.
So, I think Taylor and our assistant city attorney had some emails today, regarding this LOI. I haven't gotten fully up to speed, but I believe that this project is moving forward very nicely. Most of the issues that we've identified have been satisfied, and I think that this will be on the next Plan Commission agenda for SIP, final plat, and also the final, TIF agreement recommendation. So our recommendation on the LOI is for approval, subject to, any modifications from the city attorney.
I'm not sure which draft this is, but Matt and I made a couple tweaks, or he asked for a couple tweaks. That was fine to make, so I made those yes
Okay,
Monday.
so go with the tweaked version, the latest version.
Yep, yeah, it's just minor, but essentially, background on this a little bit is we've been putting, Terrence wants site control, you know, because we've been racking up bills with our lovely architect and engineers, and Matt and I kind of kept putting it off because we thought we were going to finalize the TIF agreement. TIF agreement's kind of taking a little bit longer, so to appease all parties, to appease my boss, I thought let's just get this letter of intent, and then it gives Matt and I a little bit more time to finalize the TIF agreement. But we're close.
Okay, so do you want, so we can't, they're still working on it, so do you still want to prove it?
No,
Why is Plan Commission approving a LOI? Shouldn't that be finance committee?
It will have to go to finance committee and council.
Okay, so it's really recommending
A
approval too.
recommendation. Yeah.
So, I mean, because the finance and real estate side is not in our purview, it's just,
We'll go to finance. I'll make that motion.
Okay, need a second?
A second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion, we are using the latest version, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Okay, Taylor, you can take a break too now, so. Okay, on to the last item, draft planning department of capital budget submittal for 2020 to 2024. Abby,
So,
Are we losing you, Kurt?
no.
This was a document that we had to put together at our department without really getting input from the TIF PMT team that we meet with a couple of times a month. So I kind of put this together without the benefit of the rest of the TIF team. We were able to meet yesterday, so we have some proposed modifications. So I'll just quickly walk you through the items that we're proposing for the EIP for our department. The first is the downtown plaza development. We expect this will happen in 2020. We have the cost estimate, it's 1.5 million. And we were looking at a city-led fundraising initiative, and it's actually now being led by the Middleton Area Development Corporation. Their goal is to raise $1 million for the project. The other 500,000 would need to be funded with TIF 3. So that's for 2020. The second item is the University Avenue Corridor Plan. This is an update to the planning document that was created in 2010 for University Avenue, but was never adopted by the city. It is an update to the plan, but it's quite outdated at this point. So there's gonna be some public input that's required. We put a budget figure of 30,000 on it. We did get some initial feedback that it might be light. Our goal would be to put out an RFP with this allocated amount, should the council proceed with funding this request out of the capital budget. And then if there is some give and take between which parts of the study would need to be completed by staff versus a hired consultant, then we would proceed in that way. The third item is the zoning code rewrite. This is absolutely needed. The zoning code is 35 years old at this point in time, and it's kind of been a little bit cobbled together by changes from our city attorney over time. Mark and I had another issue that arose today where our zoning ordinance doesn't define what lot coverage means in a non-residential property separate from residential. So there are just lots of little things that cobbled together. It really needs a full redo. And so I would like to request a modification to what we've proposed here and instead increase that figure to 100,000, because after I've been able to get cost estimates from other people and learn a little bit more about what other cities are paying, I think I guessed a little bit low on that. There's a lot of work between a consultant, staff, and the city attorney, hopefully up front, to avoid some of the bigger costs and legal fees down the road. We plan to get the comp plan completed, and then the zoning ordinance, of course, would need to follow the adoption of the comprehensive plan. The fourth item is the University Avenue and Cayuga Court crosswalk. I think you're familiar with this project. This is the needed connection, an improved pedestrian connection across University Avenue at Cayuga Court. This also will allow for a future potential bike path that's in the bike ped plan north, heading north along the belt line.
Sorry.
The next item is the North Mendota Trail Connector. We're only showing a budgeted figure in 2021 because the first phase of that project is already funded with TIF for this year. And so the remaining portion is not TIF eligible, and this would be a request for capital budget funds. Project 2201 is also for a future year, 2022. And this is Parmenter Street reconstruction north of Century Avenue, and this is the second requested change coming from staff. We would like to move this project to 2021 based on feedback from our city administrator in our TIF meeting yesterday. He thinks that we should consider looking at an earlier date for reconstruction of that street.
And that would be funded by TIF?
TIF 5, yes.
So this would be from Century up to the intersection, the
Up to Schneider.
interchange with 12, or?
No, up to Schneider.
Yeah,
Up to
just
Schneider.
north of Century and then north to Schneider. And we're looking at different cross sections. This linkage is an integral part of TIF 3. However, it's in the TIF 5 plan, so we need to get more information from our city attorney about whether a portion of it could be eligible for TIF 3 funding, whether there might be a recommendation to do a donation from TIF 3 to TIF 5. We're also looking at a possible T grant, Transportation Act grant. There are a lot of things that are still kind of moving parts to this, and our TIF engineer happens to be on vacation this week, and we've even kind of tweaked the last cost estimate that we got from him. So we're not looking at doing anything next year, but we do want to flag it for the council as a future needed improvement, just to kind of create a more urban cross-section for that segment of Parmenter Street now that we're beginning to have residences there and other developments. There are not sidewalks, there's no curb and gutter currently on that stretch.
And would that design include possible vacating the, we had talked last time about that bulb cul-de-sac off of,
Springton.
Yeah.
Springton?
Yep.
So the reason that is there now, my understanding is the current, what we've now learned is the lapsed GIP for Tribeca included retail on the north end of Tribeca, which would have required truck access there. So I think we need to understand more what is being proposed in Tribeca before we look at vacating that segment. But we did talk to Public Works about it, and I think they're aware of it, and I think they're open to it.
So it shows up in the planning department capital budget if it's funded by TIF.
So, that's a good question. The previous two TIF budgets have included major road projects, one being Pleasant View Road, and the other one is Parmenter Street reconstruction from University Avenue south to Terrace Avenue, which is being planned for next year. Those were shown in planning because they were funded in TIF, but after talking with Sean Stowski, we thought, well, it really makes more sense from a public information standpoint to show the road projects in the Public Works budget, regardless of the funding source. So we moved those two over. The reason that this Parmenter Street one is still in here is that I don't think Public Works at this point in time has made any recommendations for what the new cross-section would look like. They actually have a line item in their budget that they're submitting, not for 2020, but future year, for about $500,000 for resurfacing this same segment. So if Public Works, if that project, if our project moves forward, it would preclude their need to resurface, of course. So they're duplicating items, and Sean and I don't think we've had time to touch base and figure out how to handle it, but it's probably something we'll talk about in our meeting tomorrow morning. And then we have a project that we would like to add. I should have mentioned it before, the Parmenter Street, because this is actually 2021 project, and I printed it out for you.
Yep.
And this is Lisa and Laura Lane Street
Yep.
reconstruction, so this is another one that maybe belongs in the Public Works Committee's budget. Our budget submittals are due to the Finance Department on August 9th, so we're kind of like trying to get things on the agenda and then get them worked out before we submit them to the full council.
And that's actually pretty important because considering Trace is coming up there now.
Yeah, so we've learned in the last week that the Tracedale Middleton Market project should be moving forward quickly. They've asked about kind of dotting all the i's and crossing the t's for getting their permits in place. Based on that information, we think that maybe this should be a 2021 project. If they complete their project at the end of 2020, we don't want them to bang up the new street, but then we might want to bring it into, a more urban cross-section.
There was an article in Madison.com just tonight about Robin Farrow, which said that they intend to break ground within a month at Tresta.
Okay. And that could be, I mean, they have everything in place that they need from our department's perspective. I'm sure they've still got some things that are required from engineering in order to actually be able to pull their building permits. But yeah, I think that seems to be gaining some,
So full build out and occupancy by end of 2020.
Wow.
is that what the article said? I don't know
No,
that
I don't
for
remember.
sure. That's kind of following the initial timetable that they proposed to us. I don't know if they would complete it by the end of 2020 or if they would be planning to open in the spring of 2021.
And also it had 2 phases, at least to begin with, so.
It's a pretty tight schedule there.
Yeah.
Any,
And then, Mark, if you just wanna pull up the budget one more time. Sorry, can you go back up? There were just 1 or 2 more projects.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the Trailhead project, I think the really important part of that project has been completed, which is the city gaining control of the land. I don't think anybody on the staff is pushing that project forward on any kind of timetable, given the flooding and the damage and the conservancy, but we wanted to keep it on the radar for a future project. And then, utility undergrounding along Century Avenue, also known as Mark's pet project.
Oh, what's
all
that?
along the Century Avenue?
I think he's pulling it up to show the
Okay.
extent of the cost estimate.
Just the background here is that when Stagecoach was proposed, I had suggested that, since Middleton Hills has it up here by the VFW, that was undergrounded there, that was buried
It was
there.
undergrounded from Middleton Hill.
Yeah, and so I was suggesting here you go, you see the end right here. So I was simply saying, why wouldn't we then continue that along the area, going down the road? This is from 2 or 3 years ago now. I personally, if it's not in there, that's not the end of the world.
So is it from Old Creek Road to,
Towards Branch Street.
so just that part, $450,000?
But these things are very expensive, and,
Yeah.
I think there are higher priorities, but she's teasing me because it was just it was just something we identified with the Stagecoach project. So if you want to
Though-
drop
I
it off
have
the list,
on
that's
these
fine.
items, Abby, does the amount, is that just for construction, or does that also include design services?
The $6 million for Parmenter Street reconstruction is still a pretty rough number. We had initially gotten a cost estimate from our TIF engineer for going all the way north of the Mock, and that was $7.8 million, and that did include design services. We scaled the project back, and because Tom Stetzer is out of town this week, we weren't able to get a firm updated cost estimate from him, so we kind of worked with our planning consultant, and we tried to come up with a cost estimate. So that $6 million is a shortened segment, and it would include design services, but we need to get a better number.
Pretty
for
rough
this.
number is
Yeah,
what you're
it's pretty
saying.
rough, yeah.
I think it'd be helpful, though, to indicate which of these items are construction only and which are construction and design services.
That's a good.
Frankly, the bigger project that I just realized I'd forgotten about, sorry about that, the more important than the undergrounding, I think, we've now had an increase in train traffic through the city with Lycon. And so there have been a couple people who've asked about establishing quiet zones along the rail corridor, through the downtown specifically. In order to do that, you have to have a certain minimum length of trackage that has gates, and the gates cost, as Jen, probably you know this. I mean, these are like I don't remember the number, but $150,000 a
So
set.
you're talking about more like over 200,000, so.
Yeah,
So in this case, this is the South Avenue. If we could have those gates on South
Yeah.
Avenue, then it's,
So we'd have to pay for the gates?
Yeah, so the state does not, Madison has done some of this, the state does not pay for this.
So
So we
in order to have a quiet zone, you have to have a gate.
Yeah, but you can't just have one like, for instance, the problem especially exists, through downtown, but with Lycon now doing a lot more deliveries, we've had some complaints about blockage at, trains blocking Deming and, High Point Road. It actually hasn't been so bad in the last couple of weeks, But I know that there were some people that were pretty upset, wondering about how we can have quiet zones. So I just am throwing that out there as a idea for the future. Obviously, what's it?
No,
Oh.
I thought, when we approved that expansion of
Lycon?
Lycon, yeah, they were telling us only like, that would reduce truck traffic, and they were just gonna, not many deliveries per day.
I'm just mentioning it now. I hadn't thought about it until just now. A few weeks ago, I met with the DOT, and when we were putting this budget together, I completely forgot about it. So, anyway, you know, and it might be hard to provide a TIF rationale, but it's a quality of life matter for, you know, when the train blasts outside these apartments, it's very noticeable. So,
Yeah, this has come up multiple times,
Yeah.
and last time I spent fair amount of time on this one,
Yeah.
and
but I had a meeting with DOT to discuss a variety of issues, and I asked about it. So,
good idea, good idea.
just that's what we're doing here is brainstorming.
Any input here?
Do we wanna, where else in the city would we wanna underground utilities for kind of redevelopment corridors? Is like University Avenue,
Eventually,
Parmenter Street,
we've done Parmenter Street from University North to the
what
roundabout.
about Parmenter South from University, well,
Through downtown.
for downtown, I don't know.
I don't think that looks. I don't remember that being so problematic.
Yeah, I would rather,
Well, when we had that office building proposed at, no, not on Parmenter. What street am I on?
so it is.
That office building across the street from Culver's, that is Parmenter.
Oh, that part of Parmenter.
Yeah, that part of Parmenter.
And that's underground there.
I don't think of that as being.
I think it
as
is undergrounded,
unsightly.
that's right. It's, the fact that it's, where it's located makes it hard for,
The-
stuff to come up to the street.
Right,
That
because
was the
there's
issue.
yeah, because there's
That was the issue.
easements, right? But you know, you look at this
Is there
quarter.
a way to relocate the utilities? Is that expensive? Probably. Huh?
But to answer your question about future quarters, as university redevelops, sure, that would be nice to, you know, to get those underground. But
So do you think doing university would be should come before doing the sanctuary?
I personally would say yes, but it's also not all. Most of it's not in the TIF area either.
Well, that would be part of the University Avenue corridor
I
plan.
agree.
Yeah, okay. So any more input on these items? I think this Cayuga and University, probably Public Works would be better to handle it because they spent whole year working with the fire department on this particular section. I don't think we want to take it up, so. So they already did go through the Cayuga and University, and so
Mark was very heavily involved in
Yeah,
all of those
yeah,
meetings and discussions.
and you know, they apparently it didn't go forward, so I mean. But it's okay to put here as a number, but I don't think.
This is here because it's a TIF item.
And
Yeah,
also because
yeah.
it's a bicycle
Right.
and pedestrian
Yeah.
improvement.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Access way to our downtown, which we want to take people to.
Yeah.
well, we looked at it last
Appropriate.
year, so we can just keep on
Appropriate.
repeating it, so. But that's okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
Move to recommend approval to the Finance Committee and Common Council.
Abby, wasn't there more in the budget? Wasn't there? Is there operating in here too, or you don't have that?
Oh, that'll be at the
Oh, okay.
next meeting, because the
Okay.
deadline for that one is 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
A little more time.
Okay, do we have a second?
second.
Okay, any yes.
Abstain? Okay, and, just to clarify, does that include the 3 changes that I just verbalized
Yes,
to? Okay.
yes.
And you would include my comments about the Cayuga and University. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Take those my comments, so. Motion to adjourn.
What comment was that? What comment was that, Sharon?
Oh, well, that,
to the minute?
whether it should be moving to the Public Works, and we have already looked at it last year, so.
My comment is it's appropriate.
Make sure that's in the record too.
Yes.
Motion to
Okay, so we are adjourned.
Second.